While his entire class was whisked away to another world, Yuji chose a different path, leading to him being quietly reincarnated as a young boy named Toy. With his hero class hidden from the world, there are no flashy cheats or divine spotlights here. He relies solely on his ability to read stats, change classes freely, and evolve at his own pace. While the rest of his peers chase fame and glory, Toy builds his power in the shadows, carefully shaping this second life exactly how he wants it. This time, he isn't saving the world for a standing ovation. He's simply living life on his own terms. What happens when a hero refuses to be center stage? Let's dive in. Our story opens in a vibrant realm of lush fields and sapphire skies, where a confused soul stands before a mysterious figure. Assuming she's a goddess, he realizes a summoning is taking place. Wiping blood from his face, the boy makes it clear he has no interest in their mission. He refuses to follow the others into battle. Understanding his plea, the goddess offers a gentle smile. Toy eventually wakes up beneath a massive tree, rubbing his eyes while trying to process the dream. But as he scans his surroundings, the shock sets in. He's definitely not in his own world anymore. Stranded in a dense forest, our protagonist struggled to comprehend his surroundings, unable to believe he had actually been transported to another world. He soon noticed something unsettling about the pitch of his voice and realized his familiar school uniform had completely vanished. Clutching his head in a panic, his eyes widened with a terrifying realization. He was no longer inhabiting his own body. Overwhelmed by shock, he struggled to make sense of this impossible situation. He forced himself to calm down, desperately trying to piece together his final memories. He recalled being with his classmates when a goddess appeared, offering a summoning to a new world, an offer he had ultimately accepted. However, he had made one specific condition. He would go on this journey alone. Stroking his chin, he wondered if his stubbornness had caused him to be sent to a separate location, and if this wasn't a simple summoning at all, but rather a full-scale rebirth. Driven by a sudden urge, he decided he needed to see his new face immediately. He rushed to the water's edge and peered anxiously into the river's reflection. To his absolute shock, the person staring back possessed an incredibly delicate and cute face. He now had porcelain-fair skin and a noticeably frail physique. Even more alarming, it seemed as though his entire stature had shrunk. As he inspected his new form, he panicked upon realizing he now had breasts. A wave of sheer terror washed over him as he feared his manhood had disappeared entirely. He frantically checked inside his pants before letting out a massive sigh of relief. Confirming that his elephant was still intact, a small, triumphant smile crossed his face. He smiled, noting how surreal it felt to inhabit such a delicate body. It felt almost sinful. Panicking, he remembered his backpack and scrambled to check his gear. Emptying the bag, he found basic rations, essential items, and a small stash of currency. Though he had no clue of its value, his immediate priority was finding a weapon. After all, monsters could strike at any second. Right then, a shimmering interface manifested directly in front of him. It was his item box, stocked with various swords, a shield, a breastplate, and a potion. He felt a wave of relief, but then recalled a staple of the light novels he'd read. There had to be cheat skills. He commanded his status window to open, and there it was. But as he scanned his attributes, his excitement vanished. His stats were pathetic. He spotted his highlighted unique skills, detailed analysis, and item box, both at a low rank. Utterly dejected, he realized these were his only gifts. Talk about a classic isekai trope. Fighting back tears, he tried to stay positive, reasoning that information is the ultimate power in this world. Our hero decided to analyze everything in sight, from mundane objects to unfamiliar terms. He scrutinized every detail, pushing his skill to the limit. That's when he noticed something peculiar about his item box. It possessed a quick equip function, meaning if he prepared his loadout beforehand, he could gear up instantly. He then realized that raw character levels weren't the priority here. It was all about class levels and skill proficiency, The more he used an ability, the stronger it became. Classes were king, yet he didn't understand the traveler role. It felt just like a video game, and he even found the situation amusing, wondering what would happen if he died. Would he be reborn or return? Would he wake up in his old world, or was this the end? He realized he couldn't exactly test that theory. Since he couldn't risk a permanent death, he had to be careful. Slinging his pack over his shoulder, he set off. Staying in the forest after dark wasn't an option. He needed to escape before the nocturnal monsters emerged. Remembering he had some cash on him, he decided to head toward the nearest town. Following the riverbank, our hero eventually spotted a bridge in the distance. Relieved to find a road, he suddenly noticed a horse-drawn cart approaching. Peering closer, he was stunned to see who was actually operating the vehicle. Not only were there elves, but to top it all off, there was also a girl with animal ears. Staring at them in wide-eyed shock, he realized Beastman existed here too. It was all so overwhelming that he instinctively dove for cover. Still, he was ecstatic to confirm this was truly a fantasy world. Hoping to secure a ride to the city, he chased after them, but the protagonist quickly found himself out of breath. He couldn't quite catch the carriage before it disappeared into the distance. Just like that, his potential ride was gone, leaving him stranded. Despite being left behind, just seeing these fantasy races was a massive thrill for Toy. His motivation to explore this new world instantly soared to new heights. He watched the wagon fade into the horizon, initially hoping it might have been waiting for him, leaving Toy completely bewildered. He noticed the road was blocked, sensing something was terribly wrong. Rushing toward the wagon, he scanned the area for any hidden threats. Suddenly, a demi-human girl caught the sound of rustling in the nearby brush. She cried out a warning, alerting everyone to the incoming attack. The elf leader echoed her cry, confirming they were being ambushed. She ordered her guards to full alert while the bandits bided their time. The bandit leader commanded his men to seize the cargo, ordering them to spare the women. Our protagonist watched from the bushes, his face pale with terror. As the bandits swarmed the wagon, the grim reality of this world set in. This world was brutal, and the guards were hopelessly outnumbered. With the odds stacked against them, the situation looked dire. Watching the elf struggle against the onslaught, he was paralyzed by indecision. Could he even help? He desperately tried to rationalize staying hidden. He was still a low-level novice, and this was no time for games. A real battle against humans felt like an impossible hurdle. There was no tutorial here. Squeezing his eyes shut, a realization hit him. He couldn't just sit by and watch them die. With a roar, he lunged from the brush. He struck down a bandit with a single lethal blow before tumbling to the dirt. Even he was shocked by the sheer efficiency of his own attack. Staring at his blood-stained blade, he realized he held a powerful mithril sword. It was too powerful. The bandits stood paralyzed, watching their leader fall from a single, devastating blow. Seizing the opening, the elf girl channeled her mana and unleashed a powerful spell. Windblade! Razor-sharp gusts erupted from her hands, piercing through the remaining bandits. Seeing the magic in action, the protagonist realized the tide of battle had shifted completely. One bandit, seeing Toy kill their leader, snarled and called him a pathetic brat. His face contorted with rage. He demanded to know how the boy dared to kill their captain. The bandit roared that despite the kid's size, he was going to tear him apart. He lunged forward, thrusting his blade with murderous intent as he closed the distance. Toy instinctively raised his heavy, two-handed sword to defend himself. The bandit impaled himself on the blade, spraying the protagonist's face with hot, crimson blood. As a wave of nausea hit him, Toy realized with horror that this was definitely not a dream. The metallic stench of blood was far too real. He had taken a life, but he knew it was kill or be killed. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Was life really so cheap that people would die just to commit a robbery? This was his first true taste of the brutal laws governing this new world. The elf girl approached him, asking if he had calmed down. Toy caught his breath and nodded, saying he was fine. She thanked him sincerely, explaining that by eliminating the bandit leader, he had given them the chance to counterattack and escape with only minor injuries. Toy felt a bit awkward, knowing he'd actually just tripped. The elf introduced herself as Ruineza, the head of security for this traveling trade caravan. She extended her hand in gratitude. Toy, still amazed to be meeting a real elf, reached out and shook it. He introduced himself as Toy, using the katakana version of his real name, Fuji, as Ruineza began to speak. Mr. Toy, that before she introduced him to his master Mr. Goldtail, he should wash off the blood in the river. The protagonist asked sheepishly, bathe together. The elf whispered in his ear that she understood, since beauty like him, a Toy dono, would travel more comfortably reincarnated as a man. Toy stuttered. No, that is to say, the girls told him not to worry, and added that everything would be fine. They undressed and began to undress the protagonist. Toy looked with great embarrassment at the girls undressing. They told him there was nothing to be embarrassed about, since at his age, Toy-chan still had a long way to go. MC sheepishly covered himself and watched as the girls waded into the water with abandon. He entered the water with two naked girls and realized this world was too intense to comprehend. After their water treatments were over, they headed to the head of the trading company. The protagonist reflected on how he had somehow managed to remain undisclosed, and then he was introduced to an imposing gentleman, Mr. Goldtail, who turned out to be a very friendly man from the great merchant class. Mr. Goldtail offered him a ride to Kalafi City. They boarded the carriage and headed for the dungeon town. Toei thought it was really cool and really wanted to go there. There, he glanced at the gentleman and said, "This looks like an interesting place." Voltaire agreed and explained that this is an interesting place. Explained that the dungeon in Kalafi was called the Buldark Labyrinth. He explained that many adventurers from all over the world flocked there for its treasures and dropped items, and it was incredibly lively. The gentleman added that he was currently doing business under the name Gold to You Trading Company, based in Kalafi. Master Goldtail explained that if Toei wanted to venture into the dungeon, Goto recommended registering with the Adventurers Guild first, as it would grant him unrestricted entry to the dungeons. He warned that while the riches were tempting, the risks were lethal, and exploration was usually a team effort. Goto explained that larger parties meant smaller individual payouts, which often led to internal friction. Between the danger and the potential for betrayal, Tuya realized that solo play in a dungeon was far from ideal. Noticing his hesitation, the merchant suggested a practical solution, buying a slave to serve as a loyal party member. Tuya was stunned. The reality of this world suddenly hit him. Slavery was an established legal trade. Goto clarified that it functioned more like a strict labor contract than the cruel system Tuya imagined. Slaves held specific rights, and any treatment outside the contract or inhumane abuse was a violation of the law. Reaching into his pocket, Goto realized he'd forgotten to hand over something important, leaving Tuya confused. He pulled out a glowing record card that had manifested from the fallen bandit and handed it to Tuya to examine. Tuya stared at the mysterious object, prompting Goto to explain that it was a detailed analysis card. These cards accurately display a person's name, class, and criminal history, and can be traded for bounties at the guild. A look of unease crossed Tuya's face as he processed the morbid reality of cards popping out of dead bodies. To hide his shock, he feigned a laugh and claimed it had simply been a long time since he'd seen one. Goto then presented a heavy bag of coins, insisting Tuya accept it as a reward for saving their lives. Tuya tried to decline the payment, explaining that he hadn't saved them for the sake of a reward. He claimed his body had simply moved on instinct, but Goto looked at him with newfound admiration. Deeply moved, the merchant called him a noble man and insisted that he couldn't leave the debt unpaid. He argued that failing to reward his savior would disgrace the reputation of the Gorto Trading Company. Realizing the merchant wouldn't take no for an answer, Tuya finally sighed and accepted the gold. The driver announces their arrival as the massive dungeon city of Kalafi finally comes into view. This thriving metropolis, second only to the capital, centers its entire economy around the Boldark labyrinth. After telling Goltio he plans to stay a while, the gentleman personally escorts him to a highly recommended residence. With several months of rent paid in advance, Toy looks around and realizes he's actually quite fond of the place. Stepping into his first home in this new world, he takes a moment to appreciate the cozy atmosphere. Exhausted, he heads straight for the bed, ready to finally collapse and get some rest. However, he quickly realizes his clothes are still reeking of blood and desperately need a wash before he sleeps. Grabbing a basin, he remembers the landlady's warning. There is absolutely no running water in this town. Instead, the citizens rely on magic circuits powered by water-based magic stones as a substitute. Toy soon discovers there is no soap available either, forcing him to scrub his gear with nothing but plain water. Sitting naked before the basin, he struggles with the stubborn stains, realizing that proper baths are a rare luxury here. Public baths are scarce, and private ones are reserved for nobility. Most commoners simply wipe down with a damp cloth. Between the pit toilets and using leaves instead of expensive paper, Toy realizes even this decent hotel is incredibly primitive. He expected some hardship, but the infrastructure here is abysmal, forcing him to huddle under his blanket to escape the chill. With his only set of clothes drying, he's stuck, shivering and starving, desperately craving a bowl of hot rice. After a cold sneeze, he decides to check his finances. 10,000 gills from the goddess and another 10,000 from Goltio. Based on his analysis and Goltio's information, 1 gil is roughly equivalent to a single Japanese yen. After doing the math, he realizes he's sitting on 600,000 yen, a solid nest egg he'll need to manage carefully. To ensure his funds don't vanish, he plans to spend tomorrow buying a fresh change of clothes. If he's going to survive the dungeon, he'll need better armor too, a thought that lingers as he gazes out the window. He realized they were likely in this world as well, and he wanted nothing to do with them. In fact, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with his past life or anyone from it. He desperately wanted to erase every trace of that world from his mind. The mere memory made him nauseous, and he grit his teeth in a fit of silent rage. He refused to let his past haunt him in this new life, declaring that Fuji was officially dead. He cast aside his old identity and resolved to look only toward his future as Toy. Our protagonist gathered his thoughts and vowed to live this new life to the fullest. Raising his fist, he decided that this solo game would now become his entire reality. He would seize everything this world had to offer, but after such a chaotic day, he was spent. Exhaustion finally took its toll, but just as Toy began to drift off, something caught his eye. A new notification suddenly flickered within his analysis window. It stated that due to his rapidly increasing skill mastery, his functions had been upgraded. He now had access to detailed analysis, status management, and class customization. He was thrilled, realizing he could now swap his class at any moment. Unable to keep his eyes open any longer, he fell into a deep sleep as silence draped over the city. Kilometers away, in the capital of Malgus, Princess Armurda was berating her subjects in a panicked fury. They assured her the reports were accurate. Multiple hero-class individuals had been summoned from another world. The princess buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the arrival of those meant to save her kingdom. Meanwhile, the summoned heroes were baffled by how primitive this new world seemed. They couldn't even fathom how these people survived without modern technology or smartphones. News spreads quickly, and among the summoned heroes, one has already been labeled a criminal. Meanwhile, Toy's classmate finally notices that he is nowhere to be found. She assumed he had been with the group this whole time and can't fathom where he could have gone. Little does she know, Toy is currently fast asleep in his own bed, blissfully unaware of the chaos. As the worry etched onto her face grows, she regrets never having the chance to truly talk to him. She imagines him out there somewhere, cold, alone, and struggling to survive on his own. Shaking off the dread, she resolves to get stronger first, silently praying that he'll wait for her. In the capital of Mangas, Princess Emeralda stands before a defiant prisoner with a cold, piercing gaze. The prisoner sneers, asking who she thinks she is, to be lecturing him like a child. He snaps that he doesn't care about her royal title when she's just barking orders at them. He demands to know what right they have to treat him like a common criminal. He points out that they were kidnapped through a forced summoning without any warning. Worse yet, the royals claim they have no way to send them back home, fueling his rage. "Are you kidding me?" he shouts, but the princess only stares back in somber silence. She eventually lowers her eyes, softly asking him to calm down and listen to her plea. She clarifies that this is a request, not a command, to save the realm from a looming catastrophe. A massive monster outbreak is already beginning to spread across the entire continent. To stop the tide, the heroes must clear the first 10 floors of every dungeon in the land. Ancient records state that thinning the monster population is the only way to stabilize the world. If they fail, the dungeons will overflow within years, and the entire kingdom will be wiped out. The entire nation would face total ruin. Meeting their gaze, she formally requested the heroes' aid in clearing the dungeons. The heroes stared back in confusion as the princess assured them that every necessity would be provided for. They would live within the palace walls, wanting for nothing. She admitted the return ritual was still unknown, but once their mission was complete, the kingdom guaranteed they would find a way to send them back home. Princess Emeralda even offered them noble titles if they chose to stay in this world after their victory. Stunned by the offer, the heroes questioned if they really would live as high-ranking nobles. Hayata Uchida, the hero of the storm, noted that they didn't exactly have a choice in the matter anyway. The golden hero, Sadao Doi, looked annoyed, claiming he didn't care about dungeons, he just wanted someone to crush. The princess's assistant tried to intervene, insisting they needed a month of training in magic and combat for their own safety. However, the fire hero, Shinji Akaba, told the man to shut his mouth. He insisted they would do things their way, fire erupting from his fist as he grew eager to test his new powers. The royal guard urged the princess to step back, feeling the heroes were becoming far too aggressive. Even if they were heroes, this was crossing the line, but the princess quickly silenced her guard. She declared that if they were so eager, they should form teams and head to the dungeon immediately. They could test their strength while the kingdom prepared their equipment. The guard whispered his concerns, asking if she was truly sure about this. The princess simply smirked, confident in her decision. She remarked that letting them run wild was far better than trying to restrain them. After all, it was safer than having them turn their blades against the crown. Just then, the alchemist, Saiaka, Itsukushima, approached the princess with a nagging question. She realized someone was missing. She pointed out that they should have another companion, and asked if the princess knew where he had gone. The princess admitted she didn't know the exact count, as they couldn't predict how many heroes would be summoned. According to their official records, the group consisted of 34 individuals. With a heavy heart and a worried expression, Saiaka softly replied that she understood. It was painful to realize that no one had even noticed Fujiya's disappearance. They were too busy boasting about the dungeon. Saiaka watched in horror as one of the so-called heroes kicked a man, cruelly ordering him out of his sight. She decided it was best to keep her distance from Akaba and the others for the time being. In fact, it might be even better for Fujiya if she stayed away, a thought that frequently haunted her. Meanwhile, the host cleared the table, Surprised by the protagonist's massive appetite, they noted that he'd finished every bite, despite the portions being so large that most girls couldn't finish them. Toy approached the host and asked for the best place in the city to go shopping. After packing his bag, he decided it was finally time to head out and explore the capital. It had already been 2 days since Toy arrived in this new world, yet it all still felt surreal. It was as if he were living inside a hazy, lingering dream. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't grasp the specific details of what he'd seen. Magnus splashed water on his face to wake himself up. He dried his skin and stared intensely at his reflection in the mirror. Even after a full night's rest, the reality hadn't changed. He still looked like a young girl. Adjusting a stray lock of hair, he reminded himself that despite his appearance, he was still 18 inside. Wondering if he could pass for someone even younger, he pulled on his clothes and considered his new life. Since he had been reborn, perhaps starting fresh as a completely different person would actually be easier. He realized it would be better to leave his past behind rather than carry its weight into this new life. Deciding to fully embrace this world as Tuya, our protagonist, headed into the kitchen. There, he found a massive, juicy steak waiting for him. He thanked the hostess, praising the delicious meal. He noted it was a perfect way to start the day and made a mental note to thank Gultio later. Tuya took a bite, considering his next move. Since he was staying here, he needed a way to earn some gold. Since the town was home to a dungeon, exploring it became his immediate priority. Sitting at the table with a mug in hand, Tuya began reflecting on the revelations from the previous night. He realized his abilities had evolved to include both status customization and class management. He decided to examine status customization first and quickly discovered a major advantage. It appeared he could freely distribute his STP or stat points however he saw fit. Tuya saw his current DP was at 0, so he couldn't do much with it just yet. However, it would be incredibly useful once he started leveling up. He then turned his attention to class management. This was a game changer. In this world, changing classes usually requires a temple visit, but he could do it anywhere. His gamer instincts kicked in as he realized he could swap classes on the fly to suit any situation. This was a total cheat skill. The more classes he unlocked, the stronger he'd become. Checking his current list, he saw Traveler, Villager, Chef, Merchant, and Loader. Villager was his default, while Traveler and Chef likely came from his constant wandering and cooking. He suspected his past life experiences played a role too. Setting his mug down, he noticed 2 special classes, Avenger and Reincarnator. According to the help menu, the Avenger class required surviving 100 dire situations while maintaining a defiant spirit. The Reincarnation Hero class required being chosen by a god. Tuya was confused by the spirit of resistance, as he had no desire for revenge. He clutched his head in concern, realizing that as a reincarnated hero, using this unique class might draw too much attention. Using those classes would surely cause trouble and lead to his immediate identification. Toei smiled wryly, deciding to stick to the role of a villager or traveler for now. His next goal was to secure a proper combat class, so he headed out to observe the local stalls and the flow of the crowd. He realized the Gultio Trading Company was the dominant force here, seemingly supplying every shop in the district. Their reach covered everything from daily necessities and food to weapons and armor, leading him straight to their massive headquarters. Toei was stunned by the sheer scale of the building, and stepping inside only deepened his amazement. It felt like a sprawling complex within a shop, reminding him of a local department store or a modern shopping mall. He wandered the aisles, picking out essentials for his stay at the inn to store within his magical inventory. After grabbing a change of clothes and basic supplies, he realized he still needed to invest in spare armaments. He also needed a fresh stock of potions, though he doubted he could manage a dungeon crawl alone. Just then, Colteo spotted him from across the room. The merchant immediately approached, delighted to see the protagonist back so soon, and asked what he was searching for. Toei sheepishly explained that he was beginning preparations for a solo dungeon expedition and needed to gear up. The merchant stroked his beard thoughtfully, weighing the best options for the young adventurer. He asked for a moment of Toei's time, though the boy didn't quite understand what the man was implying. He followed the merchant down into the basement, questioning where exactly they were heading. Colteo stopped before a heavy barred door and revealed that this floor housed the slaves. Horrified, Toei quickly explained he had no intention of buying a person. The merchant looked him in the eye, acknowledging that Toei wasn't thrilled with the idea, but argued its practical benefits. He insisted it was far safer than risking his life alone and began introducing him to the various captives. He pointed out several who were already dungeon veterans, noting that magical contracts meant he never had to fear betrayal. He framed the purchase as paying for peace of mind and urged Toei to just take a look, suggesting he might find the help he needed. Despite his hesitation, Toei sheepishly agreed to at least browse the selection. Toei couldn't help but feel uneasy about the concept of slavery, despising the idea of putting a price tag on a human life like those other lowlifes. He recalled that for some families, selling themselves was their only means of survival, with slaves being divided into voluntary debtors or criminals working off a sentence. Since discrimination against slaves is illegal, the trade mostly deals in volunteers, making it feel more like a contract. If he viewed it as a simple hiring system, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, especially since the funds came from Gultio anyway. Curious, he approached the barred cells and was immediately propositioned by two slaves, a flirtatious woman and a muscular man offering his services all night long. The blatant display left Toei completely speechless, and he could only stare at them in stunned silence. Gultio laughed at his reaction, warning him that those two were far too expensive for his current budget. He explained that the only slaves Toei could afford were on a specific list, which the protagonist immediately asked to review. The roster included a level 8 swordsman, a level 7 spearman, a level 9 heavy fighter, a scout, a loader, and even a level 7 priest. Toei was shocked to see a healer among the ranks, but Gultio noted they were all just entry-level explorers with single-digit levels. Even so, they were far more capable than any average peasant. If he wanted someone stronger, he'd have to visit the Explorers Guild directly. Toei considered his options. As a frontline fighter, he really needed a tank or a healer. Yet something about these candidates felt off for the price. With a heavy fighter costing 200,000 gills and a priest at 220,000, he remembered the elf he met earlier and asked if there were any mages available. Gultio checked his ledger, explaining that mages are rare and rarely fall into slavery, meaning he didn't have anyone he could actually recommend. However, after glancing back at his records, the merchant mentioned there was one specific mage among the high-level criminals. When Toei asked if she was too dangerous to recommend, Gultio clarified that danger wasn't the issue. It was just that no one wanted her, even for a pittance. This piqued the protagonist's curiosity. What could possibly be wrong with her? He wondered if this was some classic trope where he'd find a hidden gem. He imagined a charming, difficult tsundere who would eventually warm up to him as they approached her cell. But Gultio quickly crushed his fantasies, explaining the real problem. This sorceress was over 300 years old and completely useless as a laborer. Magnus stared at her in disbelief, realizing this situation was far beyond anything he had imagined. The official explained that a catastrophic explosion during a magic experiment had leveled the entire area. Gultio added that while it was an accident, she was still sentenced to another century behind bars. Since she possessed elven blood, she could survive the sentence, but tomorrow she was headed for the mines. Magnus knew that despite her longevity, she only had a few days of life remaining. He brushed back his hair, realizing he was about to make a very impulsive decision. With a sigh, he turned his attention back toward Gultio. He asked for permission to speak with her, and Gultio calmly gave him the green light. Magnus approached the iron bars and gently greeted the elderly woman. He introduced himself and softly asked if he could know her name. After a long, heavy silence, she finally looked up to answer him. Her name was Lisa. Magnus then asked her if she had any final wishes. Specifically, he wanted to know if there was one last place she yearned to visit. In a frail, raspy voice, the grandmother gave him her answer. If it was possible, she wished to see the depths of the dungeon one last time. Hearing this, Magnus made up his mind. He was going to buy her freedom. He tried to convince himself that he was doing this for purely selfish reasons. Magnus hoisted her onto his back and began the long trek toward his home. He couldn't help but reflect that even after being reincarnated into this new world, his core nature hadn't changed in the slightest. Our protagonist questioned his own actions before recalling a bittersweet memory of carrying his own grandmother home from the hospital. A perplexed Gultio asked if he was truly certain, reminding him that a slave owner is legally responsible for their upkeep until the very end. Without a moment's hesitation, the MC signed the contract, sealing the deal. Toy realized just how impulsive he'd been. He had actually purchased a slave on only his second day in this new world, and an elderly woman at that. He continued carrying her on his back, figuring that since the deed was done, there was no turning back. Now, he decided to worry about the future tomorrow, knowing he had more than enough gold to cover their immediate needs. For a small additional fee, the innkeeper allowed her to stay, meaning food and shelter were sorted for the time being. After laying her down, he decided she would take the bed while he claimed the floor, despite the awkwardness of the situation. He brushed it off, knowing nothing would happen, but he feared the grim possibility of waking up to find her cold and lifeless beside him. Little did he know, this frail old woman named Annalise would eventually reveal herself to be a person of immense value. It was now the third day since his reincarnation. Toy woke up on the hard floor, only to see a shadowy figure of the old woman looming directly over him. Startled by her presence, he listened as she begged for forgiveness for occupying his comfortable bed. Remembering he'd purchased her as a slave, he laughed it off, admitting she gave him a fright, but insisting everything was fine. When he asked about her health, she replied with a warm smile, stating that thanks to his kindness, she felt rejuvenated. Suddenly, a loud growl echoed through the room. Realizing it was her stomach and not an illness, he decided it was time for breakfast. The innkeeper served a massive spread of fish, prompting Toy to offer half of his generous portion to her. To his surprise, the old woman devoured every single bite in the blink of an eye. This development caught our protagonist completely off guard. After swallowing a mouthful of bread, he offered her a hearty meat dish to accompany it. Toy watched in awe as she tore into the steak, her appetite far exceeding her frail appearance. He marveled at her vitality, wondering if she was actually as old as she looked, given how strong her teeth were. When the MC casually addressed her as Grandma, the old elf quickly muttered that she was certainly no relation of his. He corrected himself to Annalise's son, but she told him he could drop the formal honorifics entirely. Toy asked if she had much experience in dungeon exploration, and after finishing her bite, she admitted that she did. Delighted, the protagonist asked if he could learn everything from her, and Annalise happily agreed to share her wisdom. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who looked so weak yesterday. Perhaps avoiding the mines had given her a second wind. Despite her frail walk, Toy realized his stats were nowhere near the level of this high-tier mage. As she spoke, he realized she wasn't just an elderly elf. She was a living encyclopedia of dungeon knowledge. She taught him the essentials, from the gear a newbie needs to the strict rules of the labyrinth. She even explained how to register at the guild and trade criminal cards for bounties before they headed to the guild tavern. Toy noticed a lack of archers, Annalise explained that arrows were far too expensive for anyone but the military or the nobility. She noted that nobles avoid dungeons anyway, and that a 5 to 6 man party was the gold standard for loot distribution. When Toy asked if going solo was too risky, she warned him that entering without a scout was a death sentence for newcomers. As they shared a drink, Toy worried that joining a random party might expose the secret of his reincarnation. However, Annalise sipped her beer and assured him that with her magic, they could detect every trap and monster in their path. The MC was stunned by her utility, realizing a single mage could fulfill multiple roles at once. Finally understanding her true value, he looked her in the eye and told her that having her by his side bringing her would be a hassle, and leaving her at the inn seemed smarter since carrying her through a dungeon would be pure torture. However, the old woman politely pleaded for him to let her tag along. She insisted that if she became a burden, he could leave her behind, her hoarse voice desperate to enter the depths. Toya smiled warmly and took her hand, agreeing that they would brave the dungeon as a team. The next morning, they finally arrived at their destination. They stood before the towering portals leading into the Boldark labyrinth. Our protagonist was thrilled to finally be standing at the entrance of his first real challenge. Upon entering the first floor, he was surprised to find the dungeon far more spacious and well lit than he had imagined. His analysis skill explained that this was the entrance floor, where several different routes were available. Though the paths branched out and converged, they all eventually led to the boss room. It dawned on him that this wasn't just a physical cave, but a magical, game-like subspace. He told the old woman to stay behind him and stay safe, as he would handle all the fighting himself. Realizing his starter gear was too heavy, Toya swapped it for a leather set, including a cuirass and a mithril greatsword. The old woman watched in total shock, asking how he had just changed his equipment in an instant. He sheepishly explained that it was Quick Equip, a convenient feature of his item box. She shouted in disbelief, asking how he had an item box and if he was actually a loader before becoming a traveler. Feeling a bit embarrassed, Toya clarified that his skills weren't from a job. They were actually innate. She pressed him further, stunned that he possessed a unique skill and a sword made of pure mithril. Our hero glanced at his blade, finally realizing just how high tier his equipment really was. The old woman began shouting hysterically, leaving a panicked Toya trying to bring her back to her senses. She was left speechless by his raw talent and the sight of such an incredibly rare blade. She calmly advised him to keep his gear hidden, warning that flashing such power would only invite envy. Suddenly, Annalise snapped at him to focus on what was ahead. Their first opponent had arrived. Toy stared down a level 1 grey rat, scurrying toward him, and in a moment of panic, he begged for a second to prepare. His mind was racing, but the monster wasn't going to wait for him to get ready. Toy steeled his nerves, swung his blade with everything he had, and sliced the beast in two. Relieved by his first victory, he noticed a loot drop on the floor, some basic rat meat. He realized these creatures were slow, and with a sword this sharp, a light graze would be lethal. Gaining confidence, Toy told the old woman to stay back and just offer advice while he handled the combat. However, the grandmother simply pointed ahead, where 2 more rats were already closing in. Faced with multiple enemies, Toy froze, his newfound confidence evaporating instantly. He couldn't decide which target to strike first. But Annalise didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, thrusting her hand out to unleash a devastating torrent of flames at the vermin. Toy watched in awe as the rats were incinerated, leaving behind rare fangs and more meat. Brandishing her staff, she revealed she was level 21, making these low-level mobs a complete joke to her. She explained her own history as a swordsman before adjusting his stance, telling him to put more weight into his swings. She promised to fix his form as they went, and Toy couldn't help but smile, realizing how badass she actually was. In that moment, he knew he had made the right choice in picking her as his mentor. Staring into the dark depths of the dungeon, he realized that in this new life, everything was about to change. He found himself transported to this new world, but at that moment, he hadn't yet realized how vital clearing dungeons truly was. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, Margus, Imurta's subordinate, asked the group if they were ready to depart. He noted that 14 people, including 3 heroes led by Akaba, were eager to dive into the dungeon, while the rest stayed behind to train. The princess scanned the crowd and noticed something unsettling. The group had split perfectly between those with and without criminal records. Saiaka approached Akaba, suggesting they should prioritize preparation over haste. He shot her a cold look, mockingly asking why a chemistry teacher was being so bossy. Another girl chimed in, questioning why anyone would study in a fantasy world when following heroes was far more profitable. Imurta turned to the hero of the Azure Sea, asking if he was certain about staying behind. He calmly explained that charging into battle without intel was a fool's errand. Ikki adjusted his glasses, stating they needed to properly assess their new capabilities first. Akaba scoffed at them, calling them cowards and telling them to rot in the castle forever. Watching him, the princess realized his behavior was no different than before. Back in their old world, he was a dominant leader, while his cautious followers stayed by his side. While the cautious group showed promise, the princess sensed a much darker problem. Her eyes fell upon the group of 10, specifically focusing on the man named Shinji Akaba. According to his record, his crimes were severe: assault, blackmail, and even arson. Akaba clearly had no regard for the interests of others. He was an extremely dangerous individual, capable of showing cruelty even to his own allies. Emada realized that even if they cleared the dungeon, there was no guarantee he wouldn't turn his blade on them. She knew they'd breeze through the initial flaws, thanks to the hero class's overwhelming power, but deeper down, genuine teamwork would be vital. Since the hero summoning was a state-funded national project, failure simply wasn't an option. The princess warned Akaba that the capital's dungeon was far more perilous than others, but he just scoffed. Imurta quietly advised the group that there was no need to rush blindly into the depths. She urged them not to overexert themselves and to have the courage to retreat if they felt overwhelmed. Akaba merely smirked, dismissively claiming that it was exactly these moments of trial that defined a true hero. The princess watched him with concern, wondering if she could mold this reckless boy into a savior. From high above, the goddess observed the unfolding drama and decided to wait. She wanted to see how things played out, as it was clear that everyone involved was harboring their own hidden agendas. With a heavy heart, she silently wished them luck on their journey. Meanwhile, several days had passed since Tuya and Annalise began their own exploration. They played it safe, refusing to take any unnecessary risks within the dark corridors. Instead, they focused entirely on grinding for experience on the first floor. The primary enemies were just grey rats, so they managed to clear the area without any issues. Having leveled up and grown accustomed to combat, Tuya could now easily dispatch groups of monsters alone. Their progress was smooth, thanks to Annalise, whose keen magical perception allowed them to spot enemies from a distance. He noticed monsters usually left loot behind as their bodies vanished, and occasionally they'd even drop rare, high-value items. Still, he worried that the constant trekking was taking a toll on Annalise. Despite her advanced age, she never once complained, but Toy knew they needed to stop and rest more frequently to keep her strength up. After returning home, he decided it was finally time to have a serious conversation with her regarding his progress. As the old woman enjoyed her meal, she was stunned to learn about his unique capabilities. She was shocked that he could change classes on his own, but insisted they finish eating before diving into the details. Once she finished, Annalise explained that class changes normally require a trip to a temple and a massive amount of gold. Toy sheepishly admitted that his ability to bypass those requirements was likely a sub-function of his analysis skill. Lost in thought, the old woman missed his last remark and asked him to repeat exactly what he had just said. Our protagonist reiterated clearly, yes, it was all because of the analysis skill. Annalise leaned in close, her eyes wide as she shouted in disbelief, "Wait, you have the analysis skill too?" She questioned just how many unique skills he possessed, recalling the mithril sword and realizing he was far more than a simple traveler. Toy tried to ease her shock, promising to explain everything once he actually understood the extent of his own powers. Seeking her advice, he asked if it would be wise to change classes before facing the first-floor boss. She carefully weighed his options. He explained that the Explorer class was now available, offering essential skills like dungeon navigation and treasure hunting. Annalise noted that the Explorer class was a top-tier utility choice, providing a suite of incredibly versatile skills, though its lack of direct combat power made it a rare pick. This left our hero feeling a bit skeptical about his strength. Weak? Not at all, she clarified. It was far superior to a villager or traveler, and its rapid leveling made it the perfect choice for him. Encouraged by her words, they headed back to the first floor of the dungeon the very next morning to put the plan into motion. Ready to take the next step, Toy activated his ability and officially transitioned into the Explorer class. He noticed his appearance had shifted, now sporting a pair of sleek goggles on his forehead that looked undeniably cool. The elderly woman caught a glimpse of him and couldn't help but think how adorable he looked. Eager to see what he was capable of, he decided to test out his new dungeon movement spell. Instantly, a mystical door materialized directly in front of him. Our hero pulled it open, convinced it was a portal to another dimension where anything was possible in this fantasy world. Stepping through, he was stunned to find himself right back at their previous starting point. Annalise explained that these doors could link to any previously visited location, though they vanished after a single use. He was floored. This class was a total cheat. While it drained a significant amount of mana, it was more than worth it to bypass hours of travel on the return trip, and more importantly, lighten Annalise's burden. He wondered why this Explorer class was so rare, eventually realizing he'd accidentally triggered hidden requirements, reaching the 10th floor or slaying 10 monsters solo on day 1. Suddenly, he glanced over to see Annalise collapsing, her soul literally leaving her body. He panicked, screaming for her to come back. After snapping back to reality, she gasped for air, apologizing and admitting she was so shocked her heart nearly stopped beating. With a serious expression, the old woman looked him in the eye and urged him never to reveal his class change or teleportation abilities to anyone, as such power would only invite unwanted trouble. He agreed, and the duo pressed forward. He noted that with this new class, they'd likely be able to wrap up their work much earlier than usual. He considered organizing his item box, but stopped when he noticed Annalise lost deep in thought. Surprised by her sudden distance, he asked what was weighing on her mind. He jokingly asked if she was just hungry, but she lowered her head and offered a somber apology. She apologized for even considering asking a question that was unbecoming of a slave. Looking him dead in the eye, she asked if he was a hero, a question that sent a jolt of shock through him. Flustered, he stammered out a denial, but Annalise calmly explained her reasoning, recalling her life before being sent here. Regarding her past, she was once a slave in the capital when rumors of a massive hero summoning began to circulate. She noted that possessing multiple unique skills is incredibly rare, a one-in-a-million occurrence impossible for any normal person. This led her to believe he was linked to the heroes, making Tuya realize his secret identity was effectively compromised. The old woman quickly apologized, asking him to disregard her words, since he was the one who had shown mercy to someone like her. Beyond that, he had even brought her here to the dungeon. She insisted that regardless of who he truly was, he would always be her greatest benefactor. Looking at his kind face, she spoke with deep sincerity. She didn't know how much time she had left, but she would remain grateful to him for the rest of her days. Tuya glanced back at her, moved by her heartfelt devotion. He was about to speak up and finally confess the truth to her. However, before he could finish, he was suddenly interrupted by a strange sensation. He looked around, puzzled, until the old woman asked if something was wrong. Tuya explained that his treasure-hunting skill had just triggered. He approached a nearby wall, sensing something hidden behind it, though the old woman claimed her magical perception showed no secret doors. Tuya knocked on the stone a few times, wondering if he could simply use brute force to break through. Hearing this, Annalise offered to handle it herself, stepping forward with her hand outstretched. She began chanting a high-level spell to manifest her mana into physical matter. With a surge of energy, she summoned a massive hand of mana that loomed over them. The spectral limbs slammed forward, smashing a gaping hole through the solid wall. Tuya peered through the dust and rubble, discovering a hidden chamber tucked away behind the masonry. It was a secret room, and inside, they both spotted a magnificent, ornate treasure chest. Tuya marveled at the find, noting its expensive craftsmanship, while Annalise confirmed it was a high-level chest. She remarked that finding such a legendary chest on the very first floor of a dungeon was practically unheard of. She scanned the area with her magical perception and detected no mana, though she warned that mechanical traps like poison needles could still be hidden. Annalise offered to open it herself to be safe, but the protagonist shook his head, feeling a strange sense of certainty. He felt an inexplicable pull, as if this chest had been waiting specifically for him, and he decided to open it himself. As he lifted the lid, a brilliant, blinding light erupted from within, illuminating the entire room. The chest opened with ease, revealing a single mysterious vial tucked inside. Upon seeing the contents, the old woman's expression shifted instantly. Her eyes widened in sheer disbelief, her composure completely shattering. Her mouth hung agape as she stared at the glowing liquid in total silence. While the protagonist assumed it was just a standard potion, Annalise collapsed to her knees in shock. She couldn't believe such a legendary item actually existed, while the MC remained completely oblivious to the gravity of the find. Confused by her reaction, he pressed her for answers, asking just how rare this item truly was. She explained it was a curse removal potion, a miracle cure that cleanses any magical anomaly. It's a dungeon-exclusive item worth over 100 million gills. Stunned, he did a quick mental conversion to yen, his jaw dropping at the astronomical price tag. He suddenly realized why she had been so desperate to reach this floor and quietly asked her the truth. Was she specifically looking for this potion to save herself? Hearing this, Annalise burst into a flood of emotional tears. Covering her eyes to hide her weeping, she finally admitted that this was indeed her goal. She confessed that after her body was cursed, she could no longer explore the depths, and her failed attempts to synthesize the cure had only led to disaster. The protagonist extended his hand, offering the vial to her and telling her that she finally had what she needed. But the old woman cut him off, reminding him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime treasure that rarely ever appears on the open market. With tears streaming down her face, she urged him to sell it and keep the fortune, content just knowing that the cure actually existed. She claimed she would buy it herself, if it were even possible, while the protagonist looked on with a mix of pity and sorrow. He knew that if he waited for her to afford such a thing, a lifetime would pass them by. Her voice cracked as she desperately pleaded with him to think rationally. She argued that selling it could hire a small army, and it was far too valuable to waste on a simple slave worth only 200,000 gorils. He looked her in the eyes and softly replied, "I see. I understand." He then asked if she truly wanted him to use such wealth only for his own benefit. Twy decided right then that he wouldn't trade it for gold and decisively uncapped the jar. Annalise watched in utter confusion, unable to fathom what he was about to do. The protagonist tipped the potion over her head, declaring that he was simply using his resources on his own comrade. He asked if there was any problem with that, while she stared back, unable to comprehend his sudden sacrifice. The old woman began to groan as her skin emitted an eerie glow, prompting the protagonist to steady her in her panic. He struggled to understand if this intense reaction was even normal for the elixir. He worried her frail body couldn't withstand the potion's raw power, fearing he should have administered it in smaller doses. Amidst the chaos, Annalise began to glow with such a blinding intensity that Twy felt a massive surge of heat as he held her, and the entire room was swallowed by a brilliant light. As the blinding radiance finally began to dissipate, the light vanished, leaving a young, beautiful elf resting in his arms. He looked down at her, completely stunned and unable to recognize the woman he was holding. Bewildered, Twy tentatively asked, "Annalise, son, is that you?" She answered with tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes, sir." He was left breathless by her newfound beauty and grace. He shouted at the top of his lungs, overjoyed by her incredible transformation. Suddenly realizing her state of undress, she shrieked in embarrassment, quickly turning away to cover herself. Toy stood there in utter shock, his mind reeling at how she had transformed from a withered crone into a stunning beauty. The impact was more overwhelming than he ever could have anticipated. The contrast was so staggering that he barely had a moment to process what he was seeing. Flustered, she worried about him seeing her like this, but then remembered he had already tended to her the night before. Realizing it was far too late for modesty, Annalise suggested they return to the inn, and he quickly agreed. Since she needed to change, he summoned his dungeon travel door right then and there. He couldn't help but feel grateful for having such a convenient teleportation ability. In an instant, they were back home and stepping into their private quarters. It was only then that the weight of the situation finally dawned on him. From this moment forward, he would be permanently sharing a room with the breathtaking Annalise, living in close quarters with such a beauty. Meanwhile, 2 weeks after being summoned, Saiaka discovered her affinity for the alchemist class. This was a production-focused profession, similar to herbalists and blacksmiths who spent their days in the workshops. Unlike the others, she wasn't meant for the front lines of dungeon exploration. Her vital role was to provide the essential supplies and gear that kept the fighters alive. She watched as the hero of the Azure Sea, Mizusawa, prepared for battle. The combat-oriented students were undergoing grueling training to sharpen their skills. They were busy testing their limits and forming specialized parties to conquer the dungeons. Meanwhile, Akaba's team was struggling on the 3rd floor of Joel's labyrinth, where he was busy berating his scouts. They were moving at a snail's pace and getting ambushed, but the scouts argued they couldn't fight while hauling all the heavy gear. Akaba mocked their complaints with a sneer, just as the girls in the back begged to turn back out of sheer exhaustion. Infuriated, Akaba called the women lunatics and blasted them for recklessly wasting their mana on every little thing. He commanded them to stay put until he gave the word, but the rest of the team began whispering behind his back. They mocked how he acted like a big-shot leader despite being a total weakling, a comment that didn't go unnoticed. Akaba immediately picked a fight, leaving the girls to roll their eyes at the predictable and exhausting drama. Their bickering was abruptly cut short when the team realized enemies were closing in fast. Watching from afar, the princess sighed as the battered group retreated once again, due to their internal power struggle. She was relieved that no one had been killed yet, noting that they at least possessed a shred of survival instinct. It seemed they had just enough common sense to run when things got hairy. Nearby, Konami noticed that Saiaka was swaying on her feet, practically falling asleep where she stood. Concerned for her friend's well-being, she urged the overtired girl to finally head back and get some rest. Saiaka stretched, thanking her for the concern but insisting she wasn't ready to call it a night. She planned to push a bit longer, prompting Konami to ask the question that was clearly on her mind. Was she really pushing herself this hard because she was worried about Fuji? Saiaka looked down, her somber expression confirming her deep anxiety for him. The herbalist admitted she barely knew Fuji, having rarely spoken to him during their time together. She recalled how he had completely withdrawn from school after the tragic fire destroyed his home. Saiaka could only nod sadly, her heart heavy as she reflected on his painful past. Konami questioned whether Fuji had even arrived in this world since he wasn't with them. Saiaka admitted that while she originally thought he was nearby, she couldn't be certain. He had saved her once before, and now she felt a deep-seated need to find him and return the favor. Curling her knees to her chest with a melancholic gaze, the girl wondered if she was simply imposing her own selfish desires. Konami gave her a playful, knowing smirk, telling her she was doing just fine. Passing her a potion, the herbalist watched Saiaka closely, noting how much their chemistry teacher had matured. After Konami gave her a supportive pat on the back, a flustered Saiaka covered her mouth and began to stammer. She insisted that Konami had it all wrong, claiming she simply wanted the chance to meet and speak with Fuji one more time. Meanwhile, a warrior informed his comrade that signs of a high-ranking treasure chest had been discovered on the first floor. His companion was stunned, realizing that even on the starting floor, a massive haul was possible. He wondered who the lucky finder was, but his partner noted there was no record of the contents since reporting to the guild wasn't mandatory. The warrior agreed, admitting he'd keep such a find a secret too, noting just how incredibly lucky that person must be. Back at the inn, our protagonist jolted awake with a panicked scream. Panting, he scanned the room and realized the nightmare was nothing more than a fading dream. He let out a wide yawn, still shaken by the bizarre and vivid nature of the vision. As he tried to clear his head, he suddenly felt something soft and warm pressed against him. Looking down, he remembered that Annalisa had regained her youth, and he couldn't help but notice her stunning new figure. The MC recalled how, immediately after her transformation last night, Annalisa had broken down in tears, like a small child, overwhelmed by the pure relief of being young once more. It wasn't surprising. She was finally liberated from the crushing, constant fear of dying from old age. She had buried her face in his chest and sobbed loudly, letting all her pent-up emotions finally burst forth. Bursting out at once, the protagonist even wiped her body with a wet towel, and since she refused to let go, he had to sleep with her until she calmed down. He thought uncertainly that of course nothing had happened. Probably. Toy woke Annalise and called her to breakfast because he still needed to go shopping. He yawned and handed her his spare clothes. The girl stood up, rubbed her eyes and looked down. She saw that she was naked and blushed deeply, embarrassed. She immediately fell to her knees and began begging the master for forgiveness. She couldn't believe they had done this. In this, the protagonist tried to calm her down, but she continued screaming. She howled tearfully. If a slave like her were given a curse-removing potion, she wouldn't be able to repay his kindness even in 300 years. Toei asked her to stop and not think about gratitude or debt. He added that they would forget all this talk about slaves and masters. There was simply someone in need of help, and a potion was nearby. MC handed her a handkerchief and said they were just lucky. He looked into her wet eyes and added that besides, if she lived long, it would be lucky for him too, and that would be good for both of them. The protagonist suggested she end the conversation and invite him to breakfast. 3 tears fell from her chin, and she agreed. Toei watched her eat with surprise on his face and thought that Annalise had been eating a lot because she was trying to gain strength. But it turned out she was simply eating a lot. He laughed and said, Annalise is still Annalise the girl, her mouth full. Paul apologized and said it was just delicious. MC, sensing that she needed to prepare for the journey ahead, Annalise suggested they go gear shopping. Soon, they arrived at Hilton's trading house to pick out some high-quality equipment. Annalise eventually emerged from the fitting room in her stunning new outfit. Toy was left speechless, mesmerized by how perfectly the gear suited her mature appearance. After getting geared up, the duo ventured deep into the dungeon, where they were immediately swarmed by rat monsters. Annalise incinerated them with a casual flick of her wrist, smiling as she realized how light her body felt. Her magic had surged, leaving her in peak condition. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a volley of arrows. She shouted for Toy to duck, while expertly deflecting every projectile with her staff. She apologized, realizing her overwhelming power had accidentally triggered the room's hidden traps. Toy could only stare in awe at her skill. Flustered by his gaze, she explained that her past experience with a rapier made parrying with a staff second nature. Toy remained stunned, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. He was genuinely confused by her prowess, as she seemed even more capable than him in close-quarters combat. He initially assumed her vast knowledge and high level were due to her age, but in reality, she was only 18. Toy wondered if she was a natural-born genius, or if she had simply worked harder than everyone else. Inspired, he realized he needed to step up his game just to keep pace with her. Despite her immense power, he couldn't help but notice she didn't look old at all. Eventually, the pair reached the boss's chamber. As the tension rose, Toy felt a wave of nerves wash over him. Annalise reassured him, noting his mithril sword would make the fight easy if he stayed calm. Toy drew his blade and prepared for battle. "I'll handle this myself, but back me up if it gets dangerous," he says as a giant rat appears. The first-floor boss, a level 6 monstrosity, emerges from the oppressive darkness. He charges forward, ready to strike, but his swing misses the mark completely. The beast is massive, yet it moves with terrifying, blinding speed. He quickly realizes that his sturdy armor is the only thing keeping him alive. Knowing he has plenty of recovery items to fall back on, he changes his strategy. He shifts his focus to defense and evasion, carefully studying the monster's movements. As he observes, he realizes this magical creature follows a distinct pattern. Its attacks come in a specific sequence: 2 sharp scratches, followed by a full-force charge. He prepares his counterattack. He waits for the perfect moment after the charge. The rat slams, its head directly into his mithril sword, the force sending him flying into the wall. He hits the stone hard, but the beast rears up and finally dissipates into nothingness. He did it. He conquered the boss all by himself. Annalise rushes over, sitting down beside him to celebrate the victory. He then checks his status screen. It reads, "First floor of the dark labyrinth cleared. Drops: elite rat meat and large rat tail." He's thrilled to see that his explorer level has already risen to level 4. Another notification appears. He's finally met the requirements to unlock a new class. He looks up in a state of pure euphoria, realizing that dungeon crawling is an absolute blast. No game could ever compare to the sheer rush and sense of achievement he felt. Eager to test his new class, he considered his options. Still buzzing from the boss battle, he craved another round. He asked Annalise if the boss room was one way, but she explained that entering from the exit prevents the boss from spawning. Since it's treated as a return path, you can't re-enter the second floor without leaving the dungeon first, limiting boss fights to once a day. However, our hero remembered the dungeon travel mechanic and decided to put a theory to the test. He theorized that if he warped directly back to the boss's chamber using his ability, the boss might respawn. They stepped inside and found that his hunch was spot on. He had discovered a perfect loop, allowing him to farm the boss for massive experience and rare loot drops. Over and over, he grinded until his level began to soar. With Annalise supporting him every step of the way, they turned the dungeon into a personal training ground. Eventually, Toye returned home, exhausted but satisfied. He had pushed himself to the absolute limit, completing over 10 full runs and burning through every single potion in his inventory. Despite the fatigue, he was thrilled to see his stats had skyrocketed. He reached level 6 as an explorer, and the haul was massive. 11 elite rat meats, 5 curved teeth, 8 tails, 2 livers, and even a rare lucky tail. Annalise marveled at his natural talent for skills despite being a novice, though she teased that his actual swordsmanship still needed some work. Toya yawned, wondering if his combat instincts came from his knowledge of his past world, but then decided it wasn't worth overthinking. After selling the loot, they were finally flush with cash, so he turned to her with a suggestion. He suggested they go out for a nice dinner to celebrate her full recovery. Blushing, she took his hand and leaned in to quietly whisper in his ear. It appeared that someone had been tailing them ever since they walked out of the guild. Tuya was stunned, his eyes wide with shock, but Annalise turned to the protagonist and confirmed his suspicions. They were indeed being followed. Using her mana perception, she sensed 3 distinct signatures. The protagonist grew tense, immediately worrying that their pursuers might be enemies from his old world. He began to spiral, wondering if he had accidentally done something to expose his reincarnation. However, Annalise reassured him that she didn't think it was anyone official like the guild or the guards, as they were trailing them too quietly. They hadn't made a move to speak, leading her to believe they were likely just bandits. Annalise warned that while their identity was a mystery, letting them find their home would lead to serious trouble. She suggested losing them in a crowd, but the protagonist noted that a single glance would let him use his assessment skill. To get a better look, he decided to stop at a nearby stall to buy some fried squid. While the shopkeeper greeted him, the protagonist discreetly scanned his surroundings. His skill confirmed his fears. They were thieves. Keeping his cool, they headed back home. Once inside, Annalise immediately checked outside from the window to ensure they were finally safe. Satisfied, she sat down beside him and confirmed that the coast was clear and no other suspicious figures were lurking in the area. To stay safe, they decided to eat in their room, with the MC glad he'd picked up the snack. Stroking his chin, he wondered why they were targets, assuming someone saw him loot a rare chest or thought he looked wealthy. Annalise disagreed, noting she would have sensed anyone nearby the moment they opened that chest. It finally clicked for our protagonist as he realized exactly why they were being hunted. He began to explain that during his journey to the city, he had sliced a notorious gang leader clean in half on the road. Blushing, he insisted it was a total accident, before recounting how he and Goltio had stumbled upon bandits raiding a merchant convoy. While the guards had mostly handled the threat, he had jumped in to help finish them off. He pulled his knees to his chest, anxiety gnawing at him as he reconsidered the encounter. They thought they'd killed everyone, but could a survivor have escaped to tell the tale? Annalise clarified that the gang held a massive grudge, blaming him for their failed operation. She warned that they were now in serious danger, leaving the protagonist completely baffled. She explained that the Shardina gang controlled the city's underworld, specializing in everything from robbery to cold-blooded murder. Toy gritted his teeth, realizing he had effectively declared war on the local mafia. Annalise noted that this wasn't just a petty grievance. He had damaged their reputation, making revenge a necessity. The gang had eyes everywhere, using threats and bribery to keep the city under their thumb, and likely tracked him through the guild's information. Toy was overwhelmed, asking if this wasn't all a bit excessive. He wondered why the authorities didn't intervene, especially since he was only trying to do the right thing. Annalise explained that while the ruler of Cernafi was an honest man, the city's promise of easy wealth attracted endless scum. It was a labyrinth where criminals thrived, and Toy could only listen in stunned silence as the reality set in. He realized that even the guards couldn't be trusted, as many were likely on the gang's payroll. Closing his eyes, Toy cursed his habit of rushing into things without ever considering the consequences. Annalise placed her hand on his, reassuring him that he had made the right choice. She added that because he saved Goltio, she was finally able to meet him. As he looked at her, he wondered what she was truly like. She suddenly raised her fists and insisted there was no need to worry. She'd personally crush any thief who dared show their face. Toy let out a grin, asking her exactly what she meant by that. Annalise explained that thieves only thrived in numbers, posing no real threat when caught alone. She noted that thief was an automatic class given to criminals rather than a trained profession. Their skills were mediocre at best, which is why they relied on groups, making raw strength the ultimate defense. With a confident smile, she suggested they continue their dungeon crawl with a calm mind. Toy apologized and offered her some fried squid he had kept warm in a storage box. As they ate, she mentioned with a full mouth that fried squid was their city's famous specialty. He agreed it was delicious, realizing he couldn't let paranoia ruin his experience in this new world. Constant fear would prevent him from living a normal life, while Annalise happily munched on the tentacles. The next morning, our protagonist woke up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He found Annalise and wished her a good morning, which she warmly returned to her master. Toy asked if she'd been up all night, but she smiled, saying she had caught some sleep earlier that morning. She had stayed awake to stand guard, concluding that they didn't need to switch hotels after all. Relieved, Toy reflected on Goltio's integrity, certain the man's honor would prevent any information leaks. They soon headed toward the dungeon entrance, only to find it bustling with a massive, noisy crowd. Confused by the sudden surge of people, he wondered if it was some kind of local festival. Annalise explains that yesterday was the day of the dungeon's renovation. Toy looks at her, confused by the term, so she clarifies that once a month, during the new moon, the dungeon's layout completely shifts. On the day following this renovation, explorers swarm the area, racing to map the new floors and claim hidden treasures. Even merchants join the fray, turning the event into a festival. She mentions that rare chests only respawn every few years. Toy, intrigued by the system, suggests browsing the merchant's jewelry. Annalise explains that true treasures can sometimes be found here. Toy decides to investigate, utilizing his advanced appraisal function to scan the wares. He spots a high-quality item and hands it to Annalise, telling her with a warm smile that it would suit her perfectly. Looking down at her palm, she finds a pair of elegant earrings as Toy explains that these are enchanted accessories designed to boost her magical power, and he encourages her to try them on. Though clearly embarrassed, she agrees and puts them on. After a shy glance at the protagonist, she sheepishly asks him how she looks in them. Toy beams, telling her they look wonderful on her. Annalise clasps her hands together and thanks him sweetly, promising to treasure them. However, Toy wonders if she's simply testing the item's effects, worried that he's once again misread the romantic tension. He fears she views herself as just a slave receiving a gift from a master, creating an awkward vibe. Toy quickly dismisses the thought and suggests they move on. Suddenly, the girl reaches out and grabs his hand, stopping him in his tracks. She softly asks if she could choose a gift for him as well, if he'd allow it. Toy gives her his approval with an encouraging nod. It takes her 20 minutes of searching before she finally makes a decision. Toy looks down at the necklace she's chosen for him. Unfortunately, he's unable to identify its properties because his level is still too low to analyze it. He fastens the necklace around his neck and, sensing no immediate danger, agrees to purchase it. When she asks about its effect, Toy notes its incredibly complex magical flow, admitting he can't fully see its stats yet. Despite the mystery, he promises to wear it and thanks her for the thoughtful gesture. They shared a tender moment, exchanging sweet smiles as they walked. However, the MC soon noticed the surrounding crowd staring at them, realizing they were drawing far too much attention. A few guys approached them, shamelessly hitting on Annalise by inviting her for tea or to join their party. Annalise looked at them with pure bewilderment, coldly asking if they'd prefer a fireball to the face instead. Their friends quickly rushed over to drag them away, warning that bothering other adventurers was strictly forbidden. With the nuisance dealt with, Annalise and the MC quietly made their exit. The MC complimented her beauty, secretly admiring her incredible figure, while a blushing Annalise insisted he was the cute one. Relieved that no thieves were lurking around, they finally entered the dungeon. The MC turned to the girl and suggested they switch things up so he could test out his newly acquired class. He activated the change, officially becoming a hero class two-handed swordsman. Annalise's eyes widened in shock as she gasped, "Hero class?" while the MC casually asked if it was actually impressive. She explained that hero and saint titles are legendary rarities with immense power. This specific class combines wisdom and courage, granting him command, body strengthening, auto-healing, and slash skills. The MC was stunned by the sheer utility. Even at level 1, his base stats were massive, and the command skill provided a significant buff to the entire party. Annalise beamed, calling it truly amazing. He focused his energy on his blade and unleashed a powerful slash. The strike sent a devastating shockwave rippling through the air. He was thrilled to find it was a long-range attack. Though it had a slight recovery delay, its sheer power and cool factor were undeniable. Sheathing his sword, the MC told her they wouldn't waste time grinding in one spot today. Instead, they'd head straight for the second floor to avoid the massive crowds and the long lines for the boss. Together, they descended into the second level of the Baldark labyrinth, though the MC noticed something odd. The environment looked almost identical to the first floor, but as he looked deeper, he wondered why trees were growing inside a dungeon. Deep within the dungeon, Annalise warns him of a new threat, a level 4 ash golem and a swarm of grey rats. Unfazed, the protagonist spots the monster and nonchalantly mistakes it for a simple wooden golem. He draws the massive blade from his back, swinging it with lethal precision. He delivers a devastating blow and glances down at the fallen loot. Picking up a rat tail and an ash branch, he notes that clearing level 2 is proving to be a walk in the park. Examining his weapon, he realizes his new class is incredibly efficient, saving him a fortune on health potions. The sword bonus perfectly complements his mithril greatsword, so he suggests they head straight for the second-level boss. Annalise agrees instantly, and they soon reach the boss chamber to face a level 7 ash golem and a level 6 rat boss. Our hero immediately analyzes the situation, noting the boss's impressively long attack range. He realizes that even if he closes the gap, the rat boss will still be able to track his movements. Eschewing a direct assault, he pivots and delivers a powerful, calculated slash. Under the weight of his strike, the ash golem completely disintegrates into pieces. He watches the rubble settle, noting that the golem's sluggish movements made it a sitting duck. Thrilled with the easy win, he clears the second level of the Baldark labyrinth and loots a healing leaf and a crooked tooth. Annalise is impressed he cleared it solo as they sit down for a quick snack and a well-deserved break. They plan to farm the boss for more XP, but noticing the floor is getting crowded, he decides to stop rushing. Annalise remarks on how much further they've progressed today thanks to his insane combat efficiency. Usually, their daytime runs only allow them to reach the second boss and back before the sun sets. She breaks down the math. 2 hours for floor 1, 3 for floor 2, plus rest. Anything further requires a full camping kit. She explains that elite parties hire porters to live in the dungeon for days, leaving the protagonist completely stunned. Raising a finger, he asked how she could tell the time when the sun was nowhere to be seen. The girl placed a hand over her heart, fell silent for a moment, and then replied. She noted it was nearly sunset, making him realize she possessed a built-in biological clock. After conjuring an exit, He remarked that his progress was sufficient for the day, and she smiled in agreement. He took pride in the fact that clearing 2 entire levels in a single day was a massive achievement. As they stepped out of the dungeon, the protagonist's instincts immediately kicked in. He confirmed it was indeed evening, but his focus shifted as he scanned the area. Annalise observed the crowd thoughtfully, picking up on several subtle, suspicious clues. Shady characters were clearly staking out the gate, so he suggested they head for a different exit. He decided to skip the guild entirely, noting it would be disastrous if the building had become a trap. Frustration boiled over as he wondered if he'd have to spend this life looking over his shoulder too. Even after being reincarnated, he was being hunted. He sized up the men lying in wait and realized that these thugs weren't actually that high level at all. If he switched to a hero build with a 2-handed sword, he could wipe them out in seconds. However, he checked his temper, knowing that inviting more hatred would be a pointless waste of time. Annalise leaned in close, placing her hands on his face to help him stay calm. She reminded him that with his analysis and her magical senses, they could easily navigate around any danger. She looked him straight in the eye and confidently stated that they were the stronger ones here. She promised to crush anyone who stepped out of line. And seeing her resolve, he finally agreed to move on. Still, Annalise admitted that being outnumbered was a concern, asking if he had any reliable contacts in the city. The protagonist weighed his options, but the elite guards had already departed for the capital. Even considering Louise and Goltio, the current lineup just didn't feel right. The girls suggested that since their recent boss hunt was so profitable, they should invest in another slave to bolster their front line. A slave was the logical choice, as they were bound to keep the party's secrets. The protagonist hesitated, recalling the shady old hag from before, but he realized this was their best path forward. Fortunately, thanks to Annalise's careful management of their spoils, they had more than enough gold to make a purchase. Glancing at her with a confident smirk, the protagonist finally made his decision. It's settled. Tomorrow we'll head over to Mr. Goltio's shop. That night, deep within the grime of the Sahanafi slums, a different kind of deal was being struck. A nervous subordinate descended the stairs into a hidden, dimly lit basement. He approached the bandit leader, Shardina, who glared at him and demanded to know when the girl would be delivered. The subordinate dropped to his knees, bowing his head low as he promised her it would be soon. He explained that she had definitely joined the Explorers Guild, and they had already tightened their surveillance on her. Shardina exhaled a thick cloud of smoke before suddenly lunging forward with a wicked blade. She drove the knife through the subordinate's hand, threatening to take the other one if he didn't move faster. Shardina demanded that the girl be brought to her immediately, no matter what it took. She blew another puff of smoke, a sadistic grin forming as she promised to take very good care of her captive. The next morning, the protagonist and Annalise arrived at Goltio's trading house, greeting the merchant with a friendly smile. Goltio welcomed them warmly, noting that he had been expecting their arrival for some time. He looked over at the protagonist, having already guessed the reason for the visit, and asked if they were hunting for a new slave. The MC nodded in confirmation, causing Goltio to turn his curious gaze toward Annalise. Impressed by her presence, he asked which shop she had been purchased from, but the protagonist simply offered a vague, knowing response. Goltio's gaze shifted toward her, his expression hardening as a flicker of recognition crossed his face. She looked remarkably familiar. Could she truly be the person he was thinking of? Toy scratched his head awkwardly and confirmed his suspicions, admitting it was indeed Annalise. Goltio's jaw dropped in sheer disbelief. He locked eyes with the boy, desperate for answers. He asked if this was planned, but Toy leaned in and whispered that it was pure coincidence, urging him to keep the matter strictly confidential. Goltio offered a reassuring smile, explaining that discretion was their pride. Every employee was bound by magical contracts to ensure absolute secrecy. With that, Toy felt a wave of relief, confident that his secrets were safe. within the walls of Goldtail's establishment. Goldtail observed Toy closely, marveling at the fact that only 2 weeks had passed since their first encounter. In that brief window, the boy had grown exponentially, proving that Goldtail's initial instincts about him were spot on. Gesturing toward the back of the shop, he suggested it was time to finally get down to business. Toy's mind drifted back to the previous night, when he decided to come clean to Annalise before they went to purchase a new slave. He sheepishly confessed that he hadn't been entirely honest when they first discussed their respective classes. In truth, he held the legendary title of reincarnated hero, leaving Annalise staring at him in stunned silence. With a nervous grin, he confirmed her suspicions and admitted his true nature. Overwhelmed by the revelation, Annalise covered her face as she processed the weight of his words. The realization hit her. She had been liberated from her curse by none other than a legendary hero from another world. She looked up at him, trembling, and asked if being a reincarnated hero meant he originated from a completely different realm. Toy nodded, explaining that while other heroes were summoned directly to the capital, he was uniquely reborn right here in Kenneth. Everything finally clicked for her. His overwhelming power and his strange ignorance of common knowledge finally made sense. Looking at him with newfound curiosity, she wondered if he had somehow been separated from his allies during the transition between worlds. Lowering his eyes, the protagonist clarified that he wasn't abandoned. He was the one who rejected them, refusing to stay by their side. Meeting her gaze, he explained that this was exactly why he hid his status as a hero and refused to work in that profession. He added that he wanted to avoid unnecessary battles with bandits and stay out of the spotlight, apologizing for being such a cowardly hero. She quickly reassured him, insisting that anyone who risks their life for others couldn't be a coward, and that she was proud to stand with him. Internally, he winced. The story was moving, but a hero buying slaves wasn't exactly a noble look. He turned his attention back to Goltio. Goltio glanced at his ledger and nodded, confirming he understood the specific requirements for the slave purchase. Our protagonist mentally recapped the criteria: not a criminal, enslaved due to debt, willing to fight, no set profession, and a 400,000 grill budget. Goltio looked at him with a hint of surprise, noting the lack of any specific preference regarding race or gender. With a polite bow, the trader asked them to wait a moment while he gathered the most suitable candidates. The protagonist knew his demands were strict and wondered if the right person even existed. He needed someone he could mold. He wanted a blank slate whose profession he could choose from scratch. Soon, Goltio returned with a group and thanked them for their patience. He presented the lineup, explaining that based on the criteria provided, these were the best candidates available for review. Most were demi-humans enslaved for economic reasons. As the protagonist scanned the room, he saw a diverse mix of elves, dwarves, and beastmen. Faced with so many choices, he felt overwhelmed. His eyes landed on a draconian who looked incredibly powerful. And yes, it could even fly. Goltio had included a premium option for 250,000 grill. The protagonist also noticed a talented elf, though the poor guy looked quite sickly. That one was priced at 150,000 grill. Moving down the line, his eyes stopped on a small figure. Was that a child? He quickly realized it wasn't a child, but a goblin worth 80,000 grill. He was shocked to even see a goblin in this world. He soon understood that in this realm, goblins weren't mere monsters, but an intelligent race. Goltio noticed his confusion. Asking if he'd ever seen a small goblin, the trader noted that despite his size, he was a 20-year-old adult sold by his parents after failing to find work. Our hero scanned the group one last time, weighing his options as his gaze drifted back toward the powerful draconian. He realized the other slave was too large and eye-catching, and buying him would only attract unwanted attention. The protagonist glanced at Annalise, wondering if there was someone else she was interested in. The girl lowered her eyes, stating that she believed the master's choice would undoubtedly be the right one, before he turned back to the merchant and announced his final decision. He patted the small goblin on the head and agreed to take him for 80,000 grills. The merchant looked at him in surprise, remarking that this was a rather unexpected choice. He explained that this goblin was quite strange, as he claimed his only dream was to become a king of hand-to-hand combat. The merchant doubted if the creature would even be useful, but the protagonist simply replied with a confident smile. He insisted that everything was fine and asked to prepare the contract, having noticed something unique during his evaluation. The merchant agreed and immediately began drawing up the paperwork so they could take the slave with them. Now, the protagonist wondered if this would cause issues and whether Annalise and the goblin would even be able to get along, remembering that elves and goblins were usually bitter enemies. He watched as she calmly held his hand, explaining that her parents had no racial prejudices and that she herself was actually a half-elf. The protagonist signed the contract and was surprised to learn the child's name was Rosarina. Annalise then turned to him and asked, "Didn't you notice?" before adding that the child was actually a girl. He was stunned to learn the goblin was a girl, and he couldn't help but think that after his last purchase, the merchant surely thought he had some very strange tastes. The salesman bowed deeply, thanking him for the purchase and confirming that the paperwork was finally complete. Before leaving, the protagonist asked if it was possible to sell materials harvested from the dungeon in his shop. Gultio confirmed that his shop buys rare items at a premium compared to the standard guild rates. Tui found the arrangement perfect, but the merchant warned him about dangerous thugs lurking around town lately. Gultio looked him in the eye, offering his personal help should any trouble arise. The MC knew merchants were the first to hear rumors, but he thanked him and assured him everything was fine. As they stepped outside, Toei gazed at the sky, realizing the merchant likely knew more than he let on. He didn't want to become even more indebted to Gultio-san than he already was. Tui smiled at the goblin, welcoming her back before introducing himself and Annalise. The goblin raised a fist in determination, while Toei decided it was time to get everyone geared up. They needed to hit the dungeon, but first, they had to grind some levels. The goblin's breath grew heavy as she slammed her fists together, eager for combat. Toei laughed, impressed by her fiery enthusiasm. When Toei handed her a sword, the goblin looked confused, as she preferred fighting with her bare fists. Toei apologized, but insisted she use the mithril greatsword for now, while he carried a spare. He then asked Annalise if she could handle any magic users, and she calmly agreed. Using his mana hand, Toei quickly snatched up a grey rat. Holding the vermin tight, he ordered Rosarina to finish it off. The goblin obeyed instantly, swinging her blade and decapitating the beast. Immediately, she felt her level rise. Toei praised her performance, stating that today was all about power leveling as fast as possible. Both Annalise and the goblin eagerly agreed to the plan. Soon, they reached the boss room, and Rosarina prepared to dive in. After delivering the finishing blow, the protagonist laughed and praised Rosarina for her vital role in the fight. He asked if she was starting to feel the fatigue, but she cheerfully replied that she was still in top form. Noting her incredible stamina, the MC looked at the long queue at the boss's chamber and decided on their next move. He suggested a lunch break, and as they ate, the goblin companion was shocked that the fried squid was still piping hot. Annalise leaned in and whispered that while the master possessed many unique skills, they must never speak of them to outsiders. Rosarina gave a knowing smile, delighted to be surrounded by both thrilling battles and gourmet food. It was a perfect moment, and the MC admitted he was genuinely impressed by Rosarina's combat prowess. Annalise even remarked that she handled a blade better than the master himself, leaving him stunned and asking if she was serious. Rosarina explained that she had always carried the heart of a warrior, even during her darkest days as a slave. She had spent years visualizing every strike, dreaming of becoming the ultimate master of combat. However, because she focused solely on training and neglected her chores, her life took a tragic turn. Her own parents eventually sold her into slavery, a revelation that filled the protagonist with deep sympathy. He urged her to stay patient, promising that once her level increased, she would finally achieve her dreams. Suddenly, a man nearby smirked and began mocking them for bringing a lowly goblin into a dungeon. He called them an eyesore and told them to get out if they wanted to eat, before turning his gaze toward the MC. "What are you staring at, you little brat?" he spat, adding that a goblin stood no chance against a floor boss. The Beastman growled that the dungeon was no place for children's games and warned them to leave if they valued their lives. Infuriated, the protagonist stood up and suggested they settle once and for all who was actually playing around. The Beastman roared back with a sneer, asking the boy if he was truly looking for trouble. The boy stood his ground, reminding the thug that he was the one who insulted his friend, until a massive bear man intervened. Since their turn was approaching, he agreed and left, while the bear apologized for his comrade's outburst. Our protagonist reciprocated the apology. The bear then explained that the hot-headed tribesman held a deep-seated grudge against goblins. Despite being a novice who couldn't gauge power levels, the bear leader clearly sensed our hero's true strength immediately. Looking back at the crowd of beastmen, the goblin lowered her head in a somber apology. She blamed herself for being a goblin, but our MC reassured her that bigots like that wolf simply needed to be silenced with overwhelming force. Rosarina grinned, slamming her fists together in agreement. With their bond strengthened, they entered the boss room, where the MC marveled at Rosarina's incredible natural talent. She was already a formidable fighter, even without backup. Turning to her master, she cracked her knuckles and asked, "Can I try fighting bare-handed?" Toy glanced at her and, with a bit of hesitation, gave her the green light. Confident in her strength, Rosarina charged into the fray, pulverizing monsters with nothing but her raw power. She shouted that fighting with her bare hands made her feel more alive than ever before. Watching her feral enthusiasm, the MC realized that a monk or fighter class would be the perfect fit for her. He noted she had already reached level 10 as a villager, which meant the time was near. She glanced back, asking, "Soon what?" The MC then explained that his detailed assessment skill revealed that when a goblin hits level 10 in the villager class, they undergo a racial evolution. Though their base stats might start low, they experience a massive sudden surge in power. He added that during this transition, their class automatically shifts to the most compatible profession based on their innate talent and luck. But the result remains a mystery until it happens. Suddenly, the MC saw the goblin begin to glow as the transformation began. Rosarina looked on, bewildered by the blinding light of her evolution. Her aura intensified as her class shifted to Battlemaster, triggering a massive evolution. As the light faded, she realized she had succeeded, with sharp horns now crowning her forehead. Annalise and the MC watched in stunned silence, barely able to recognize the new Rosarina. Rosarina noticed her increased height, while Toy stood mesmerized by her new, statuesque figure. She was now taller and more striking than ever, a testament to the grueling effort she had put in. It was clear she had conquered countless bosses to reach this stage, and she could feel the power. Every movement felt fluid and precise, exactly as she had envisioned in her mind. Toy watched in disbelief, realizing that he was now officially the weakest member of his own party. He was staggered by the sheer amount of growth she had achieved in a single day. Rosarina had undergone a complete racial evolution, ascending from a common goblin to a goblin assassin. Whether driven by her own willpower or fate, she had unlocked the unique Battlemaster combat class. Since this class restricted her to only gloves and boots, The MC offered her some of his spare gear. Her unarmed attack stats were off the charts, further enhanced by a fighting spirit skill that surged her power. With her insane agility and martial arts, she was now the ultimate dodge tank for the team. Toy wondered if he had a hidden luck skill, feeling as though he were dancing on the palm of a goddess. 2 weeks post-reincarnation, the air grew cold. Annalise warned of winter, though Rosarina remained unfazed. Toy noted that bathing with cold water was getting difficult and suggested they start heating it. He also brought up their living situation, suggesting he rent a separate room for the 2 girls. Annalise stared at him with a blank expression before her face twisted in shock. She barked that it was unacceptable, as she needed to protect him, while Rosarina refused to sleep on the floor. The protagonist tried to pacify them, expressing his gratitude for their concern, but there was only one solution. He pointed out that since they both refused to let him sleep on the floor, they were at a stalemate. Ultimately, the night ended with him sandwiched right in the middle between the 2 girls. He lay there with his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, desperately wondering how anyone could possibly get any sleep in a situation like this. Toy reflected on how much smoother their operations became once Rosarina joined the vanguard. Their combat efficiency had skyrocketed as they steadily pushed through the dungeon's 3rd level. They were making effortless progress until the protagonist looked aside and a sticky spiderweb slapped him right in the face. Annalise quickly checked to see if he was all right and brought her fire staff close to the silk. He thanked her as the heat melted it away. He realized the primary monsters on this floor were spiders, and noted that he wasn't exactly a fan of the creepy crawlies. He soon found that getting caught in their webs debuffed his agility. Rosarina, however, seemed completely unfazed. He was mostly annoyed by the sheer volume of attacks coming from all sides. Handling the front lines alone would be a nightmare. He even wondered if spiders usually shot silk from both ends. He eventually chalked the strange biology up to them being magical dungeon creatures, but his biggest frustration was the loot. He couldn't believe they were just dropping bundles of cotton. Annalise explained that in this city, trading dungeon-harvested cotton thread was actually a massive industry. It's available year-round with stable prices, thanks to local policy. She added that these spiders also drop magic stones, which serve as a vital energy source for magical items. This makes the level a prime spot for adventurers to earn a steady living through gathering. The protagonist could only look at her in pure shock. He realized the dungeon's infrastructure was cleverly designed to regulate the monster population. He noted it was a brilliant strategy, just as expected for a town guarding the labyrinth's entrance. Glancing at the ceiling's webbing, he recalled the previous night when he asked Annalise for a favor. He needed her help to test a new ability. Handing her a rope, a confused Annalise watched as he turned around and folded his hands behind his back. He requested she tie him up as tightly as possible. A flustered and blushing Annalise could only stammer in confusion before she began binding him. She wrapped the rope around his body in a complex shibari style, prompting him to ask if she was even doing it correctly. Annalise sighed, noting she never expected her knowledge of binding techniques to be used on her own master. Toy quickly clarified this wasn't for pleasure. He simply wanted to see if he could escape should he ever be captured by bandits. Specifically, he wanted to test if storing the rope in his item box would set him free. Annalise gave him a pitying look and simply agreed. However, when the protagonist attempted the escape, he accidentally stored his clothes instead. Rosarina looked away in secondary embarrassment as Toy struggled to retrieve his gear and get dressed again. Looking at the spider silk and his sword, he wondered if his item box could manipulate the webs the same way it did the rope. He successfully stored the webbing inside his dimensional storage. He then realized that as long as a projectile wasn't moving too fast, he could intercept it mid-air to prevent it from ever reaching its target. He also noted that since the silk was a physical material, he could potentially weave and launch it himself. Annalise watched this display of ingenuity in total awe. Toy explained that standard item boxes used by merchants are usually limited and cannot store stationary or formless objects. However, his unique reincarnation skill was special, as it perfectly preserved the temperature and freshness of anything inside. While living creatures were off-limits, the capacity would only grow if he switched his job to a merchant or porter. He had already managed to fit an entire house's worth of supplies into the void. Suddenly, a realization struck him as he connected the dots between his various abilities. A new strategy formed in his mind, and he decided to prepare this secret weapon for the upcoming boss fight. Entering the third-floor boss room, they are met by a level 10 monstrosity, a giant, repulsive spider. The protagonist mutters about how disgusting it is, while Rosarina warns him of its deadly venom and webbing. She explains that once weakened, it summons its brood, and that's when the real nightmare begins. Adjusting his glasses, he steps toward the boss alone, telling Rosarina to stay back while he handles it. He prepares for the strike, knowing that no matter the size, every spider shares the same fatal flaw. Using his item box, he unleashes a massive surge of stored energy, obliterating the beast instantly. While the MC celebrates his success, a bewildered Rosarina wonders how he's suddenly using high-tier magic. Tui simply smiles, explaining that it's actually Annalise's magic he had previously stored away. He notes that with enough practice, he can unleash devastating spells without any risk, a strategy he calls pure cheating. He realizes that in this world, the item box is the ultimate cheat code that decides everything. Despite the victory, he's disappointed by the low EXP gain and decides to save his big moves for emergencies. After clearing the level and looting the room, Toei is thrilled to find he's unlocked a brand new profession. Seeing his success, Rosarina throws a hilarious tantrum, demanding her own chance to fight one-on-one. He promises she can take the lead next time as they breeze through the third and fourth floors. As they continue to level up, Toei realizes that with Rosarina's help, he can safely remain a seeker. This class boosts his treasure-hunting luck and drop rates, allowing him to bask in the glory of rapid leveling. He dreams of eventually mastering every trade, from merchant to cook, until something foul hits his face. It's formic acid. Annalise warns him that a moment of carelessness can cost him dearly. Before he can react, his clothes begin to melt away, leaving him in a rather compromising position. Resigned to his fate, he decides to at least restock his supplies of acid and silk from the fallen spiders. He was safe, but he desperately needed a bath. The girls urged patience, warning of potential bandit ambushes at public baths, promising to heat water back at the inn. Yogiri imagined the other heroes feasting on delicacies and soaking in the royal tubs, but he quickly realized he didn't care one bit. Meanwhile, Saiaka let out a sneeze, wondering if she had caught a cold after another late night she hadn't even noticed passing. She wandered down the hallway, debating with herself whether it would be better to soak in the tub before finally heading to bed. Stepping into the water, she savored the warmth, quietly noting that having such a massive, luxurious bath all to herself at night was an absolute privilege. It was exactly what one would expect from a palace. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind, and Saiaka nearly jumped out of her skin. It was Princess Elnita, asking if she could join her. Startled to see Her Highness, the girl nervously asked why she was there. The princess explained that while she had a private bath, she preferred this one late at night, when her duties were finally done. Saiaka worried she might be an intrusion, but the princess told her to relax and set her anxieties aside. Addressing Saiaka by name, the princess suggested they spend some time chatting. Saiaka managed a sweet smile, though she couldn't help but notice the princess remembered everyone except the specific hero she sought. She replied that she'd be happy to talk if she was good enough company. The princess nodded, finding the prospect intriguing. She then asked if their world was truly built on science, which she mistook for violence. Saiaka smiled, explaining that while magic is hard to replace, their world's logic is just as complex as alchemy. She noted how chemistry works differently here, leaving her quite confused. The princess then mentioned she saw Saiaka looking for someone during the recruitment. Saiaka laughed it off, claiming it was just her imagination. Deep down, she knew that if Yagiri wanted to avoid the other heroes and their conflicts, mentioning him to the princess would be a terrible mistake. The princess looked her in the eye, praising her potions. Apparently, the soldiers highly valued them for their astounding effects, all thanks to her skills. Thanks to her, the palace's supplies had improved exponentially. Saiaka smiled back as the princess looked at her, urging her not to overexert herself. Despite being summoned against her will, Saiaka worked late every night, a dedication that felt strangely touching. Saiaka replied that she was simply doing what she loved, finding genuine joy in experimenting and seeking solutions, as the alchemy of this world was begging to be explored. Hearing the princess's kind words, Saiaka felt a sense of peace. She then asked Her Highness if she was also struggling to manage Akabana and the other heroes. Nomada lowered her head and sighed, admitting that a little was an understatement. It was a nightmare. She added that they were plagued by constant infighting, petty schemes, and even violence toward the palace servants, not to mention their reckless waste of supplies and habit of robbing other adventurers. Complaints from investors and guilds poured in daily. The princess couldn't fathom how they had even survived this long. Nomada folded her hands, sadly stating that the real issue was their lack of results. They couldn't even clear the third floor because the heroes did nothing but bickering instead of cooperating. She looked at Saiaka and apologized, knowing that venting to the production staff was a burden. But Saiaka just smiled and assured her that everything was fine. She then asked if Mizusawa and his team would soon finish their preparations and head into the dungeon. The princess nodded, adding that their only hope now rested with the team joining them later. Saiaka gestured to herself, insisting that all matters regarding equipment and support should be left to the production team. She explained that she was already developing several items for combat, earning a warm, affectionate smile from the princess. Saiaka then turned to Her Highness and handed her a small vial, suggesting that if she had the time, she should try it. Nomada glanced at the jar and asked if it was some kind of aromatic oil. Saiaka explained that she'd developed it with the pharmacist to be used in the bath. The princess was surprised, remarking that she finally knew where that wonderful scent came from. She thanked Saiaka, noting that their talk had truly lifted her spirits. Saiaka looked at her and hesitated. Being addressed so casually as Ikushima-san felt awkward, and she wondered if they should be more formal. The princess chuckled softly, teasing Saiaka, who immediately turned red with embarrassment. Remurda apologized for rambling, but at that moment, the focus shifted back to Toy. Toy was perched on the roof alongside Annalise and the goblin, while Rosarina kept a watchful eye on the street. The area below was crawling with bandits. They scoured the pavement, oblivious to the group hiding above. The protagonist had nearly stumbled into a group of them near the inn, realizing he'd been far too careless. Looking down from his vantage point, he couldn't help but feel frustrated at having to hide like a fugitive. He knew taking them down would be easy, but getting involved meant facing a never-ending cycle of reinforcements. To avoid further trouble, it was better to stay out of sight. Though Annalise still apologized for the situation. She felt responsible for not noticing them sooner, but Toy reassured her, noting the city was so infested with thugs that you could hit one just by throwing a random stone. Still, Annalise sensed his underlying concern and asked what was wrong. The protagonist admitted that if they stayed, they'd eventually bring unwanted danger to the hotel and its staff. Since they had plenty of funds, he suggested they start rotating through different inns more frequently. It would be a hassle, but their monthly payment was almost up anyway, making it the perfect time to vanish. Annalise reluctantly agreed, though she looked down sadly, mentioning how much she'd miss the delicious food at this particular inn. Toy glanced down, realizing that despite their success in the dungeon, these bandits were a persistent thorn in his side. He watched the criminals loitering below, unsure of how to permanently resolve the harassment. Suddenly, Rosarina raised her hand with a grin, announcing she had the perfect solution to their problem. As Toy listened, she suggested a simple fix. They should just smash every single bandit to smithereens, so their master wouldn't have to hide. Naturally, the protagonist had expected that kind of blunt, violent response from her. He pointed out that 3 people couldn't take on an entire gang without knowing their lair, adding that if it were that simple, the city lord would have fixed it long ago. Tuya pondered the situation and realized the primary obstacle preventing a total bandit purge was the simple fact that the corrupt officials had informants working right under their noses. Suspecting this was the case, the protagonist realized a solution might finally be within reach. If he utilized his new profession, he could devise a clever plan to bypass their network. Tuya approached Annalise with a brilliant idea, prompting her to ask if it involved bandit protection. Confirming her suspicion, he explained he'd use his new class skills to handle the threat. But first, he needed to hit the dungeon to level up and sharpen his skills before the big test. Watching him with piqued interest, the girls prepared themselves for the upcoming grind. The next morning, Annalise insisted on an early start to get a jump on the day. Tuya suggested they stock up on gear first before finally arriving at the dungeon entrance. Curious, Annalise asked about his new profession, to which he admitted the name was a bit grim. He told them they'd see soon enough, then activated the skill and triggered a transformation. He successfully executed a class change to assassin, leaving the girls absolutely stunned. How did you get such a rare class? They wondered, as Tuya explained the mechanics. By defeating a high-level boss without using standard jobs or skills, he had fulfilled a secret, hidden condition. It seemed unique skills were the loophole he needed, though Annalise only knew of the class through dark rumors. Checking his stats, he found skills like stealth and divine speed, realizing this was a class meant for the underworld. Rosarina cheered, convinced their master was now powerful enough to wipe out every bandit in the land. However, Tuya clarified that he wasn't interested in the assassin's raw combat power. He was solely focused on the stealth skill, then asked the girls to turn away for a moment. "Give me a minute, please," he requested. The girls complied, but when they turned back around, their shock was absolute. Their master had completely vanished into thin air. "Right here," the MC's voice rang out from behind them. Startled, the allies spun around to find him standing right there. Stunned, they listened as he explained that the stealth skill allows one to suppress their presence and become invisible. While it won't activate if someone is already watching, he can still move freely once it's active, making it the ultimate tool for infiltration. Annalise hummed thoughtfully, processing the tactical advantage. "So you're planning to use this to sneak into the bathhouse?" she teased indignantly. "The lengths men go to for a peek," Rosarina added, flustered. The protagonist immediately protested, calling it a crime. He had no desire to be labeled a total creep. Seeing his reaction, Annalise laughed and admitted she was only joking. Was he actually planning to raid the bandits' lair and assassinate their leader? He muttered that he wasn't that reckless. Even if he wanted revenge, a mindless slaughter wouldn't truly fix the underlying problem. He believed that even if they deserved punishment, it should be delivered by those with the proper authority. It wasn't his place to play judge and executioner. Instead, he planned to infiltrate the administration building. With his detailed analysis skill, he could identify exactly which officials were in league with the bandits. If he could gather solid evidence, the landowner would be forced to take action himself. At least, that was the strategy. Once the spies were exposed, the bandits would lose their leverage. In a perfect world, they could even coordinate a massive simultaneous raid, Annalise smiled at his foresight. But first, he needed a full day to level up his assassin class. This profession was honestly broken. The vulnerable strike skill was particularly lethal. It offers a massive critical hit rate, which jumps to 100% during a surprise attack, while also tripling the damage dealt. By detecting enemies with sense presence and sneaking up in stealth mode, he can guarantee a triple damage opening blow. The raw power is insane, especially since there are no weapon restrictions. Even a two-handed sword benefits from that triple damage lethality. High, but there's also the divine speed skill to boost his agility. While attacking breaks his stealth, making group fights risky, having Rosarina's team covers that weakness. For solo duels, this class is unrivaled. It's a lucky break, even if it's just a starter class. It's essentially a career for a cold-blooded assassin, which would ruin his reputation. He has to keep this a secret, much like the hero of Rebirth. Once his assassin level hit 10, he knew he was ready. With the girls cheering him on, he wasted no time the next morning and infiltrated the administration and the military to root out the moles. He never expected to be playing a real-life stealth game in another world. Even if he got caught inside the office, he wasn't in any real danger. As long as his face remained hidden, he could always use his godlike speed to vanish. Without wasting a second, he got to work. While staking out the office, he was disgusted. These officials weren't just working with bandits, they were taking bribes and embezzling funds. The corruption ran deep. He wondered how they planned to manipulate the system using personal status cards. Waiting for the workday to end, our hero activated his new level 10 skills, Phase Walk and Trace Erasure. He phased right through the wall, noting how illegal this job felt. Sifting through the files, he hit pay dirt. Hard evidence of embezzled treasury funds. He told himself to stay calm. He wasn't stealing. He was just borrowing this for the authorities. If they audited the cards, every bandit spy would be exposed. However, the head of administration might bury the truth, so he had to deliver this evidence directly to the Duke himself. Arriving at Cernafi's palace, he was genuinely impressed. Unlike the lazy bureaucrats, the court knights here were absolute professionals. It was clear that their commanders maintained a strict and confident standard. Observing their orderly ranks and sharp appearance, he admired their flawless discipline. There wasn't a single slacker in sight. It seemed the bandits had only managed to flip low-level guards or menial servants. Lost in thought, he barely noticed nightfall approaching. He needed to find the Duke quickly. He checked the office first, but it was empty. The man had likely retired to his private chambers. Creeping toward the chambers, he peered through the window and saw a maid asking the Duke if he required anything else. Arcane declined any further assistance, asking only for a glass of wine. The girl bowed respectfully, telling him she understood and wishing him a good rest. From the shadows, the protagonist watched as the ruler sat down to leisurely enjoy his drink. He thought to himself, "So this is the Duke? The man holds absolute authority over Kernif, and he exudes a powerful, mature charisma." The MC immediately activated his assessment skill. He was stunned to find that his literal profession is Duke. He's a level 35 powerhouse in both politics and war. For such a class, that level is insane. Even level 20 is rare. This is the pinnacle of aristocratic professions. His stats are simply off the charts. The MC realized with a shock, this man is stronger than him. Realizing he was in over his head, he decided to quickly drop the evidence and get out of there. But suddenly, Arcane's brow furrowed. He turned his gaze directly toward the MC's position, sending a wave of shock through the protagonist. It shouldn't be possible. His stealth skill was still active. Had he actually been spotted? The Duke rested his hand on his sword for a tense moment before finally turning away. The protagonist wondered if he had just imagined it, but he was now paralyzed with fear. What kind of monster was this man? The MC nearly lost his composure and dropped his disguise. According to a detailed analysis, the Duke is flawless. He has no criminal record, but would he really be willing to expose a family scandal? Or would he just hush it all up? Trusting him was a gamble, but the MC quietly placed the documents on the sofa and vanished. Arcane noticed the papers a moment later and remarked in surprise that they hadn't been there a minute ago. Taking the documents, he read them carefully before whispering in amazement, "How interesting." He examined the evidence, a ledger of embezzlement and a list of bandit collaborators. Amused, the Duke summoned Rakushin and Balkan immediately. Our protagonist watched in shock, realizing the Duke knew he was still there. The Duke muttered to himself, "To think someone could infiltrate my private quarters. Such dexterity and courage. Who could this mysterious visitor be? Was it a disgruntled official, determined to expose the truth? Or perhaps a runaway from the gang itself? Or maybe just a conscientious seeker of justice? Regardless, by delivering this personally, the message was clear. He wanted the Duke to take action. Luckily, the Lord was already tired of the stench of corruption within his administration. He decided to deal with the matter tomorrow, even choosing to forgive the crime of breaking into the palace. However, if these documents proved to be a fabrication, there would be no mercy for the messenger. Our hero realized his work wasn't over. He would likely have to return to this dangerous place again tomorrow night. Drenched in a cold sweat, the MC finally escaped the palace grounds. He was utterly exhausted, but he couldn't rest just yet. He needed to regroup with Annalise and the others as quickly as possible. He found the girls waiting anxiously for his return, and he quickly moved to reassure them. It seemed the plan was a success. The Duke wasn't wasting any time and would begin the purge immediately. Annalise was stunned, asking, "What did he say? Did you actually speak to the Lord face to face?" He answered sheepishly, explaining that even with his stealth active, the Duke seemed to see right through him. It was a terrifying experience. Annalise gently stroked his head to comfort him, saying the only thing that mattered was that he returned safely. Rosarina then shared some exciting news. They hadn't been idle while he was busy infiltrating the palace. It turned out the girls had successfully narrowed down the approximate location of the bandits' hideout. Annalise spread out a map of the region, highlighting 3 primary locations where the gang was likely hiding. Among all the buildings in the slums, this central hub showed the most activity. The leader was likely hiding here, but she also sensed a flurry of movement deep underground. It seemed they were using a network of tunnels to stay connected. Realizing this, our hero muttered, "I see." The bandits had clearly prepared escape routes for when raids occurred. Decisively, he prepared to move. Being no stranger to stealth, he decided to scout the area alone. His allies were shocked, asking, "Right now?" He explained that a purge of government informants would likely begin by morning. He had to strike while the bandits were still unaware. Annalise insisted on coming along, and Rosarina was quick to back her up. He gave them a warm look of appreciation, but insisted that since this wasn't a battle, he'd be faster solo. Annalise refused to let him face danger alone, while Rosarina was itching to bash some bandit heads herself. He worried that bringing a full squad would trigger an all-out war. He proposed a compromise to keep them at bay. If he didn't return within an hour, they could storm the place and rescue him. Annalise snapped back, asking what they were supposed to do if he was already dead or maimed by then. He laughed it off, reminding them that he could phase through walls and move at godlike speeds. Reluctantly, they agreed, though Rosarina swore she'd break the door down if he was 1 minute late. Upon arriving at the site, the protagonist scaled the wall to get a better vantage point and assess the layout. He spotted the tallest building, identifying it as the likely headquarters for Shardina's gang. His goal was simple: pinpoint the leader's location and track down their cache of stolen riches. He deployed his webs and swung silently over the enemy lair, keeping his presence hidden as he planned to secure the loot for the Duke before making a swift exit from this lawless territory. Peering through a window, he observed the chaos inside. This wasn't a professional organization, just a pack of thugs. These were common thugs, lacking any specialized skills like lockpicking or stealth. Instead, they held grim titles like murderer or black market trader. These weren't low-level crooks to be trifled with. Suddenly, his appraisal skill locked onto the target he was looking for, Shardina. As their leader, she'd named the gang after herself. Her profession was listed as Blood Queen. What kind of monster was he dealing with? Shardina was currently berating her subordinates, demanding to know when they would finally bring that idiot to her. They reported he was hiding in the Eastern Hotel District, prompting her to menacingly declare that if they couldn't find him, they'd just pillage every hotel in the quarter. Our protagonist was stunned. Not only were they plotting openly in front of him, but they were perfectly willing to drag innocent people into their mess. Realizing he needed to move quickly, he immediately shifted into seeker mode. He activated his treasure-hunting skill and peered through the wall of a nearby room, his eyes widening in total disbelief. He'd hit the motherlode. This was their secret vault. The room was overflowing with crates and sacks of stolen riches. As he scanned the loot, he was floored. He found black gold and piles of currency worth over 100,000 grills. There were rare jewels and powerful magical artifacts everywhere. He swallowed hard, trying to fight the urge to help himself. If he gave in and took the loot, he'd be branded a hero thief. Meanwhile, he knew Rosarina was likely losing her patience. He needed to scout an escape route first. He detected multiple auras coming from a room deeper within the dungeon. However, these weren't bandits. Descending into the sublevel, he was horrified to find rows of shackled children huddled on the floor. A wave of fury washed over him as he recalled the city's strict regulations. Child slavery was a capital offense in this city. He looked closer at the victims, his heart sinking further. He noted the hollow, indifferent expressions on the children's faces and realized the sickening truth. This was a dark slave den, and the entire room reeked of the metallic scent of blood. Seeing torture instruments laid out on a table, he stood frozen, his mind racing with how to handle this atrocity. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Rosarina turned to her comrade, wondering why their lord was taking so long. Just as they were preparing to leave, someone unexpected appeared. Our hero finally stood before them once again. Annalise rushed to his side, frantically asking if he was injured or if he was all right. Recalling the blood-stained torture chamber, he was consumed by a dark, sickening rage he hadn't felt in ages. Annalise called out to him again, but both girls could only watch in confusion, unable to understand the cause of his sudden change. He looked them in the eyes and told them their days of running and hiding were over. Even without the Lord's help, he would dismantle this gang himself. His grim expression boded ill for his enemies. Soon after, the army breached the bandits' hideout. The bandits cried out to Shardina in terror, claiming that even their entire unit couldn't stop him. She snapped at them to stop whining and at least buy her some time before fleeing to the roof. Shardina chuckled nervously, asking if he really thought he could escape after making it this far. Suddenly, the realization hit her. This was all his doing. 8 hours ago, the searchers had found the administration building completely locked down. This prevented anyone from submitting the forged documents to the Duke as planned. That morning, the Duke had personally audited the employee records, resulting in 8 immediate arrests for embezzlement and ties to the criminal underworld. Once the operation was officially completed, the Duke made a public declaration. It was confirmed that the intelligence was accurate. Administrative Commissioner Rekushan Zaigan, a level 42 count, was forced to offer his deepest apologies to the Duke. He claimed he never expected so many criminals to be in his ranks, but Arcane knew better. This distinguished man is the head of administration and the Duke's right hand, essentially the second most powerful person in the city. The Duke insisted on taking the burden of responsibility, admitting that as the ruler, the ultimate blame rested on his shoulders. He'd ignored the corruption of the nobility for far too long. Turning his attention to Balkan, Arcane praised him for his efficiency. He commended him for successfully apprehending the criminals. This was August Balkan, the level 42 Guardian Knight and commander of the Knightly Order. Balkan bowed in gratitude, but the Duke's tone turned stern as he lamented how government officials had devolved into mere bandits. Since these criminals belonged to noble houses, Arcane ordered a full interrogation to uncover every detail about their illicit organization. He demanded they be dealt with immediately, while also instructing Rakushin to enforce a total information blackout. They needed to prevent news of this scandal from escaping the palace walls. Suddenly, Balkan grunted and stared intensely toward the window. When the Duke asked what was wrong, the knight replied that he felt as though they were being watched. Outside, Steve froze. Perched just beyond the glass, Steve trembled in fear. How could the man have sensed his presence from such a distance? This man was a total beast. As a Guardian Knight over level 40, he was less of a human and more of a walking natural disaster. He was even more intimidating than the Duke. Steve recalled Annalise's warning about Balkan. The man hailed as the kingdom's strongest warrior. Legends claimed he once sliced through a fortress wall with a single swing. Rosarina had been awestruck, but Annalise's warning was grave. She told him that if he ever crossed paths with Balkan, he should run and never look back. Now, Steve realized he was facing that very monster. Arcane realized their guest from yesterday had returned as requested, but Balkan roared, furious that someone had infiltrated the palace twice. The knight prepared to neutralize the intruder, sending Steve into a panic as he realized he was already within the brute's striking range. He felt his life flashing before his eyes, but just as Balkan moved to strike, the Duke intervened and stopped him. Arcane calmly explained that the man outside was his invited guest, noting that if he intended harm, they'd be dead already. The Duke added that his guest had likely come to see for himself how the administration handled the recent corruption. He wanted to see if the Duke would bury the evidence or actually punish the guilty. It seemed Steve had underestimated the Duke's resolve. He had already shown his goodwill, yet today he wasn't even receiving a token of appreciation. Our hero remained silent, thinking to himself that they could just keep it. With a snap of his fingers, he sent over more files, including the bandits' hidden base, their internal layout, the leader's location, and a list of stolen goods. Rakushin gasped, "What is this? Child slavery, a list of victims, drug trafficking, murder for hire, and even forced executions." The Duke fumed, realizing this was why so many children had vanished. If the intel was solid, then they had to storm the lair immediately. However, the commissioner suspected a trap to draw out the palace guards and leave the capital defenseless. He refused to act without confirmation. Arcane chuckled, acknowledging the logic, then turned to Balkan to ask for his opinion. Speaking frankly, the commander admitted he didn't feel threatened by the informant at all. This took the protagonist by surprise. The commander then suggested a risky gamble. They would send a tiny detachment of only 30 men while keeping the palace fully guarded. The Duke was skeptical. Could 30 men really take down an entire criminal organization, numbering over 300, especially when they operated out of 3 separate bases? Balkan remained unshaken, claiming he would personally handle every last one of them. Overhearing this, our hero was stunned. The commander planned to flush the bandits toward the center and take them all on alone. He wondered if the old man was insane or just arrogant. It was all brawn and no brains. What about the slaves? What if the leader escaped? Then it hit him. They were discussing this plan right in front of him on purpose. That look on the Duke's face, they were letting him hear everything. It was a subtle invitation for him to take action. Was he expected to handle the details alone? Regardless, he'd find a way. Our protagonist cursed the Duke's audacity, realizing the man had seen through his facade from the start. It was a blatant signal that his secret was out. Still, since he was already planning to head there, having the knight's support was an unexpected stroke of luck. Returning to his group, he addressed his allies by name, confirming they would proceed with the plan at the northern base. Meanwhile, the bandits were lounging in boredom and dreaming of ale, until a sudden ambush sparked pure chaos. Panic spread like wildfire as they realized a battalion of knights was closing in on their position. Amidst the commotion, the order to engage was barked out. Shardina snapped, demanding to know the situation. The panicked bandits screamed that they were being pincered by knights from both sides. With enemies surging from the north and south, the leader roared, demanding why there was no warning. Where was their informant? A bandit stammered that the administration building was supposedly closed for the day. The woman lashed out, calling him a fool for not reporting the lapse sooner. Just then, the bandits froze. Vulcan stepped into view, his very presence radiating a truly ominous and suffocating pressure. Terror gripped the outlaws as they stared down the edge of his massive, legendary blade. The commander desperately ordered his men to hold their ground, promising glory to whoever could slay this man. Vulcan simply dropped into a fighting stance and unleashed a devastating strike upon his opponents. Watching from the sidelines, our protagonist could only look on in sheer disbelief and awe. The man was a total monster, a force of nature that no sane person would ever dare to cross. Assessing the battlefield, he noticed the resistance was far stiffer on the southern front, slowing their advance to a crawl. Meanwhile, the knights were realizing their opponents possessed inhuman strength. It appeared they had used combat stimulants, making an immediate retreat their only option. They simply couldn't withstand the onslaught. Just then, Rosarina activated her fighting spirit boost, a skill that surged her physical stats for 10 seconds. She charged the bandits, declaring that 10 seconds was all she needed. With lightning speed, she decimated her foes in an instant before vanishing. The female knight gasped in shock, wondering who their mysterious savior was. But the girl was already gone. Rosarina ducked behind a wall, gasping for air as the protagonist gave her a thumbs up, silently promising to reward her efforts later. Her restraint in not overextending herself was truly commendable. During their briefing, he instructed the girls to pin the bandits down, while they retreated toward the northern base near the palace. To succeed, they needed to seal the passage and isolate the northern sector. Annalise took charge of the mission, and arriving at the northern passage, she realized fire magic was too risky for the city streets. Instead, she channeled her mana into a massive physical strike at maximum output. The resulting mana strike shattered the earth, obliterating the passage and the bandit station along with it. A knight cried out, fearing an earthquake, while Vulcan noted that the intruder clearly had powerful allies. Reports soon reached Shardina that their northern underground passage was gone, and the south was breached. Furious, the leader cursed his men's utter incompetence. She seethed with rage. Every move and plan they made had been predicted, yet they were the ones being played for fools. Had one of her own men really betrayed her? No one should dare think she'd surrender so easily. Turning to her assistant, she issued a cold command. She warned that if any incriminating evidence surfaced, they were finished. Every slave in the dungeon had to be eliminated. Stunned, her subordinates questioned the order, wondering if she was truly serious. They asked where she was headed, but Shardina simply ordered them to keep up. Meanwhile, her first assistant had already reached the slaves below. Pressing a blade against a captive's throat, he declared that their leader had given the order. Everything was to be destroyed. But at that exact moment, the protagonist arrived. He yanked the man away from the girl and slit his throat in one swift motion. Trembling with terror, the girl pressed herself against the wall as our hero reached out a hand. He reassured her that it was over and that the knights would arrive shortly. Leaving the dungeon behind, he climbed out and pressed onward. Simultaneously, Shardina navigated the basement corridors, accompanied by two assistants. They struggled with her belongings until one of them spotted a secret passage in surprise. The other dared to ask if she could carry her own weight, but Shardina silenced them. Nearing the stairs, she plotted her escape. The exit was just ahead, but when she looked back, her assistants had vanished. She shouted for them, but only silence answered. She wondered where they could have gone. Had they actually abandoned her? Impossible. Her obedience skill ensured they could never defy her, meaning they hadn't left by choice. Realizing an intruder was among them, Shardina sneered, wondering if he really thought he could corner her. Testing her resolve, the bandit leader activated her gaze-revealing skill to find her foe. Spotting the protagonist, she screamed, "Don't you dare underestimate me!" She unleashed a magic blade at him, and the protagonist barely managed to evade the strike. He cursed under his breath, realizing how close he'd come to being caught. His gear saved him, but a poisoned weapon? That was a deadly addition, and she was incredibly fast. She was a gang leader after all. His stealth had failed, but he refused to let her escape. He'd phased through the wall to beat her there. "So that's how we met on that roof," she hissed. He was the boy named Toy who had destroyed everything she had spent years building. Now, she was forced to start over from nothing, starting from scratch, all because of him. The MC looked at her coldly. From scratch? Well, he thought, let her start in the mines to pay for her sins. Though at her age, she won't survive the labor. Shardina let out a sharp, furious breath and spat out a venomous insult. She vowed to sever his limbs one by one before she finally finished him off. They charged at one another, and our protagonist closed the distance. Crouching low, he expertly slashed her with his blade. As the blow connected, Shardina plummeted from the roof, landing right in front of a stunned Balkan. The man looked down in shock, stuttering out her name in disbelief. High above, the protagonist sat on the roof and caught his breath. He realized that despite all the subordinates she'd gathered, in the end, she was truly alone. At that moment, his loyal allies rushed to his side, their voices filled with concern. MC smiled to himself, realizing he finally had comrades he could truly depend on. Shortly after, the lead knight reported to Commander Balkan that every enemy base was cleared and the child slaves were safe. Balkan ordered his men to remain vigilant until the evacuation was fully complete. He mused that the Duke was right about our protagonist. He truly was a fascinating individual. Soon, the system notified the MC that on the 30th day since his rebirth, he had cleared the dungeon's 4th floor and dismantled Shardin's gang. While his allies celebrated their hard-won victory, the protagonist was busy enjoying a soak in his brand-new home. Rosarina and Annalise suddenly joined him, ignoring his protests as they insisted on helping him scrub his back. As he struggled to maintain his modesty, he recalled contacting the Goltio trading house just a few days prior. The owner had asked if he was looking for a rental with a bath, claiming they had the perfect spot for him. The protagonist and his team eventually went to inspect the property Mr. Goltio had recommended. When they arrived at a massive mansion, Rosalina couldn't hide her utter shock at the scale of it. She wondered if it was too big, but the MC noted it had 3 floors and a massive garden. It wasn't just a house, it was a literal palace, and Goltio confirmed exactly that. This estate formerly belonged to a nobleman as a country retreat, complete with a basement and a wine cellar. Due to the recent bandit crisis, many nobles had lost their influence or fled the city in a hurry. This left luxury estates available at bargain prices, fully furnished and ready for an immediate move-in. However, Goltio added that a mansion of this scale would surely require a dedicated staff of servants. The protagonist panicked, arguing that a massive mansion and servants were way beyond his current budget. Goltio countered that it wasn't beyond his means, considering they reached the dungeon's middle floors in only a month. Building a secure base for the future was a wise investment, and the MC realized the merchant was right. For someone who dives into dungeons daily, a proper home is vital, especially one with a private bath. It's an incredibly tempting offer. He estimated the rent and staff salaries would total about 80,000 gold per month, which felt like a small fortune. Luckily, he has enough savings to cover it. He plans to hunt bosses more frequently to level up and keep the gold flowing. He's willing to push his limits for this. Ultimately, he tells Goltio he'll take the house, sealing the deal with a firm handshake. Goltio thanks him and insists on starting preparations immediately, even offering to handpick the servants himself. Our hero tells him he's counting on his expertise. He realizes Goltio is a truly top-tier merchant. While Annalise calls it a bold move, the MC just laughs it off, and Rosarina is thrilled about having a garden to train in. The day after buying the house, they meet their new staff, a family of 3. Mondarch handles the housework, his wife Merlis cooks and cleans, and their son Jewel manages the garden and repairs. The protagonist is a bit taken aback, but greets them warmly, surprised to find an entire family dedicated to his service. Goltio assures him that these 3 will be more than enough for now, personally vouching for their professional skills. The MRC introduces his allies to the servants, explaining that while they are technically his subordinates, they should be treated as his equals. Mondarch bows politely and agrees to the request, though he reminds the master that he doesn't need to use formal speech with them. The MC can tell these 3 are seasoned veterans who previously served a noble family in a distant land. Due to some private circumstances, they recently relocated and accepted a very modest wage. The MC never expected to have a butler, but he tells them to come to him with any concerns. Mondarch begins by asking about their dietary preferences, specifically referring to the girls as mistresses. Rosarina is instantly flustered, stammering that there must be some kind of major misunderstanding. She protests that she's just a slave, not a mistress, while Annalise firmly tells the butler not to address them so formally. The MC awkwardly explains that he isn't picky, quantity matters more than quality, and asks them to use first names. He then whispers a warning that Rosarina has a massive appetite. Hearing this, Rosarina turns red with shame. Mondarch nods in understanding, while Merlis just watches them with a warm smile. Jewel observes the girls, thinking about how young and energetic they seem. In reality, these 3 servants were extraordinarily talented at their jobs, possessing incredible attentiveness and master-level culinary skills. The accommodations were top-notch, and with so many vacant rooms available, the protagonist invited Mondarch and his family to move in and work for him. Since all 3 were combat-ready, the mansion would remain secure even while he was away. The 3rd floor served as a private sanctuary for him and his allies, and though the girls had their own rooms, they usually slept in his. Our hero was thrilled to find that magical artifacts provided modern luxuries like running water and a full kitchen, even in this fantasy realm. While magic stones were required to power them, making the bills quite steep, that was simply the price of living in a major hub. It was easy to see why the dungeon city was so prosperous. That evening, as the MC stood on the balcony lost in thought, Annalise approached. She asked if something was bothering him, but he admitted he was simply overwhelmed by the mansion's scale compared to his humble, long-lost former home. Annalise watched him intently before asking if he ever thought about returning to his original world. Without hesitation, the protagonist replied that he had no such desire. This was where he belonged now. He couldn't imagine a world without her. Stunned by his sincerity, the girl blushed and asked him to repeat what he just said. Caught off guard by his own boldness, he grew flustered and quickly avoided her gaze, muttering nonsense under his breath. Their intimate moment was cut short when Rosarina suddenly pounced on them from behind, scaring them half to death. The MC nearly tumbled over the railing, but the girls managed to grab his legs and haul him back to safety. After catching his breath, he declared their break over. Tomorrow, it was time to dive back into the dungeon. Their target was the newly discovered 5th floor. Meanwhile, Rekushin entered Arcane's office with a grim update. A final decision had been reached to punish 4 trading houses and 8 noble families for their involvement with the bandits. The Duke approved the sentence, decreeing that the trading houses be stripped of their licenses and have their assets seized immediately. The commissioner then inquired about the fate of the traitorous nobles. Arcane's gaze hardened as he ordered their total destruction. A harsh lesson was needed to secure the future, and their crimes would be made public. The heads of families, their wives, and their children are to be executed. Adult sons will not be spared, and the women will be handed over to the temple. Every relative and associate is required to present their identification cards immediately. Under no circumstances will any exceptions be made. Rekushin confirmed the orders, and the Duke noted that a new era of discipline would surely face pushback for its harshness, but it was necessary. Safety remains the city's absolute priority. The commissioner gave his word that every detail of the purge would be carried out to the letter. Arcane then pivoted the conversation, asking if they had managed to locate that mysterious assistant yet. Rekushin reported that while intelligence was still investigating, a promising candidate had surfaced among the city's scouts. This individual appeared a month ago under the name Toy, though according to the bandits, his description is frustratingly vague. He is reportedly searching for a specific girl and is registered with the guild as an 18-year-old rank 1 traveler. He is currently traversing the dungeon alongside an elderly elf and a goblin slave. They've already reached the 4th floor. Arcane pondered the news. It was bizarre, as that intruder was clearly no mere novice. With the trio reaching the 4th floor, the report mentioned a powerful mage and a fighter. Could it be that this elf and goblin girl possess high-tier professions? The commissioner agreed it was possible, but suspected the boy was the key. He likely possesses a skill to mask his true identity and class, perhaps the stealth of an assassin, or something even more specialized. The Duke noted that without knowing his true strength, making an enemy of him would be a death sentence. He had no wish to wake up with a blade pressed against his back. Strangely, the boy killed the gang leader, but left the rest for the knights to dismantle. Was he trying to force the Duke into his debt? Whatever his plan, such audacity was truly boundless. He commanded his assistant to maintain surveillance until the boy's true intentions were revealed. Meanwhile, our protagonist and his unlikely allies were celebrating their progress on the 5th floor of the dungeon. Rosarina was in high spirits, absolutely delighted by how much fun they were having. Annalise admitted the dungeon's atmosphere was impressive, while the MC noted that the monsters on the 5th floor were labyrinth cows. The area had expanded, and since these beasts charge in straight lines, they were easy to handle. Plus, their drops, meat, hides, and horns were highly valuable. Annalise mentioned this floor is a favorite for mid-tier adventurers due to the gourmet meat, a point she brought up so often the MC teased her about it. Nearby, Rosarina engaged another beast, daringly grabbing it by its massive horns. With a firm grip and sheer strength, she effortlessly flipped the cow onto its back before delivering a swift, fatal strike. Stunned, the protagonist joked that she was stronger than the monster itself. She just grinned, claiming it was all about timing and a single, decisive blow. As they harvested the prime beef, Annalise noted the open space was perfect for magic, immediately incinerating a nearby monster with a fire spell. The savory aroma of seared steak quickly began to whet their appetites. Suddenly, she shouted a warning as an enemy lunged at the protagonist from his blind spot. The MSC nimbly evaded the strike, sending the beast careening past him. The monster crashed headfirst into a massive boulder with devastating force. The MC smirked as the rock crumbled from the impact, revealing a hidden surprise. He gasped in disbelief, spotting a secret treasure chest hidden inside the debris. The girls celebrated his incredible luck, while he realized that baiting these cows into specific walls could be a genius way to farm hidden rewards. He asked Annalise to inspect the find, figuring his assassin skills could handle any potential traps. She noted it wasn't locked and didn't look dangerous, yet she still had a lingering sense of unease. She suggested using a mana hand to open it from a safe distance. Skeptical, the protagonist asked if this was some kind of gimmick, but Annalise activated her skill and the chest popped open with ease. The protagonist stared in surprise. Nothing happened. Was it empty? Suddenly, the hero shouted at her to stay away, desperately trying to get her to safety. But it was too late. Vicious tentacles erupted from the chest, and the girl screamed in terror, "It's a monster!" The MC barked an order to Rosarina, and without a moment's hesitation, she rushed forward to aid her comrade. With a powerful kick, she slammed the lid shut, severing the monster's tentacles instantly. Suddenly, she cried out in pain, clutching her bruised leg and complaining about how rock-hard the chest was. The protagonist struck the mimic with his weapon, only to realize with a shock that even mithril couldn't pierce it. It possessed insane physical defense and vitality. It was a true mimic. The MC noted that the creature remained calm under pressure and was incredibly durable. Annalise stepped up decisively, declaring she would handle it and ordering the group to retreat. They followed her command perfectly, clearing the way as the girl launched a blazing fire arrow at the beast. It was an immediate, direct hit. She cheered, having realized the monster was weak to magic, especially when targeted in the mouth. Stunned by her prowess, the protagonist praised her skill, but she just smiled sheepishly. She claimed it was just luck, as this was her very first encounter with a creature of this nature. The chest burst into flames, leaving behind a mysterious book. Annalise picked it up, her eyes widening in amazement. It was a grimoire, a rare job change item. The protagonist was floored. He hadn't realized such powerful items even existed. He glanced at the girls before activating a detailed evaluation of the item. The description revealed that anyone who used this tome could unlock their latent mana and transition into a magical class. With an abysmal drop rate from dungeon monsters and chests, its market value sat at a staggering 2 to 3 million grills. Stunned, the protagonist gasped in disbelief. 2 to 3 million? This thing is worth a literal fortune. Annalise noted that in regions lacking dungeons, its value skyrocketed, making magic books the ultimate prize for any adventurer. It was a get-rich-quick item. But Jin suddenly remembered Annalise mentioning she was originally a swordsman. She confirmed that a similar item had allowed her to switch to a mage class, thanks to a massive stroke of luck early in her career. She had stumbled upon a similar book by chance, and her party had agreed that whoever found it would be the one to use it. Despite some initial hesitation about selling it, she eventually chose to embrace the life of a mage. Jin responded with deep respect. "And what a choice it was," Annalise added with a smile, noting that many professions are highly sought after, even outside of dungeons. Whether as a soldier or a craftsman, a mage's value is undeniable. Surprised, Jin wondered if magic could truly be learned without rote memorization. She explained that magic is a specialized skill, and only those in magical classes can truly harness its power. The traditional path is grueling, requiring even the most talented individuals to study at specialized academies for at least a decade. Because of the immense cost, only the nobility or the ultra-wealthy usually become mages, making the dungeon a rare equalizer for commoners. Jin marveled at his luck. He finally had a shot at a magic class. though he decided to hold off since Annalise was already their caster. With Rosalie's unique class and his potential switch, a team of 2 mages and 1 melee fighter would be perfectly balanced. Ultimately, he decided not to rush the transition, as Annalise's current magical support was more than sufficient for the time being. While he was lost in thought, Rosalie soloed the 5th floor boss, the Labyrinth Bull, leaving Jin stunned by her sheer speed. Shortly after their victory, the group returned to the city to cash in their hard-earned rewards. The haul netted them a tidy sum, and Jin was shocked at the high prices for 5th floor materials. Annalise reminded him that time is money. He muttered to himself about the dungeon as they finally returned home. Sinking into the bath, he wished he could relax like this every single day. Renting a house was a great decision. Later, he told the girls that reaching the 6th floor would be easier now, then asked Annalise about her own progress. She revealed that she had previously reached the 5th floor of the Baldark dungeon back in Kalafi. After changing her class, she moved to the capital to test her skills elsewhere. She mentioned the Jora dungeon, but as the words left her mouth, she became uncharacteristically pensive. The MC asked if she was all right, but she just laughed it off, claiming everything was perfectly fine. She explained the level 6 wall, the point where monsters become significantly more dangerous. They start resisting normal physical attacks, and specialized flying monsters begin to appear in droves. This massive difficulty spike forces basic classes like swordsmen to either change their professions or learn high-level skills. Since most players get stuck at level 5, the protagonist realized that level 6 is where the real challenge begins. He hoped they were ready, and Annalise confidently assured him they could handle it. He told them to get some rest, to see what tomorrow would bring. A short while later, the house grew quiet. Once the girls had finally fallen asleep, the MC began to reflect on their situation. It was obvious that Annalise was troubled by her past in the capital. He wondered what had truly happened to her there. He wouldn't force her to talk, especially since he had no desire to return to the capital and face his past himself. His former allies were there, and if he had his way, he'd erase those treacherous faces from his memory forever. To be honest, he couldn't say he missed any of them, with one possible exception. Saiaka was still on his mind, but he knew he'd likely never see her again. The next morning, it was time to move. The trio set off for the 6th level of the Baldark dungeon. Right away, the MC noticed a change in the environment. The area was much more spacious, with significantly higher ceilings. He could only wonder what they would encounter in these depths. Suddenly he shouted, "What on earth is that flying thing?" Annalise calmly identified it as a gargoyle. Without a second thought, Rosarina launched herself at the stone beast with a powerful flying kick. However, she only succeeded in bruising her leg, realizing the creature's hide was as hard as solid iron. Our hero cursed. A flying monster resistant to physical strikes was the ultimate counter for an assassin. Realizing the difficulty had spiked, the protagonist decided to swap tactics and summon a 2-handed swordsman. He commanded his ally to use a combat strike, and Rosarina unleashed a bastard slash and a fiery fist technique. Their combined efforts brought the beast down. "Excellent," the MC cheered, impressed by the success of their special moves. The magic had been effective, and he felt they could win, but their relief was short-lived. A massive swarm of bats suddenly swirled in to replace the fallen gargoyle, outnumbering them instantly. The protagonist worried about skill cooldowns and mana depletion. Fighting 3 at once was already a nightmare. He ordered a tactical retreat to the entrance. Rosarina activated a boost, scooped Annalise up, and bolted toward the exit, with the protagonist keeping pace. Once they finally reached a safe zone, he caught his breath, noting how grueling it was to be swarmed. While Annalise's magic was helpful, he realized it was time to finally utilize the magic book and the equipment he had purchased earlier. Annalise beamed with a joyful smile, agreeing that it was a fantastic idea. She'd be thrilled to have him become a fellow mage, something he surely wouldn't mind. The protagonist agreed, and with a sense of anticipation, he finally opened the ancient tome. Suddenly, the book erupted in a blinding light as arcane symbols began to flow from the pages. The knowledge surged directly into his mind, catching him off guard. As he focused, the system displayed a notification that left him absolutely stunned. Wait, what exactly is this? The requirements for the class were strange. Wasn't he supposed to be a mage? With no time to waste, our MC made his choice. He decided to proceed with the job change anyway, calling forth the power of the Magister class. Annalise was stunned, unable to comprehend how this was possible. Her shock manifested in a violent outburst of disbelief. He wondered if this was something entirely different from a mage. A dazed Annalise admitted she'd heard of sorcerers, but never a magister. He told her to stay calm while he checked the stats, only to shout in surprise there was a 1 in 1,000 chance for this class to appear. Once Annalise regained her composure, she agreed his luck was insane, while Rosalia laughed, confirming he was truly blessed. Now, the real question was whether this class was actually viable, as Magister seemed to be a specialized role for amplifying magic. He tested it on Rosalia, whose fire magic surged with intensity, realizing his new role granted massive bonuses to an ally's attributes. Essentially, he'd become the ultimate buffer, even applying an acceleration spell that made Rosalia feel as light as air. She was staggered by her newfound agility, realizing that his various buffs could actually be stacked for even greater power. Eager to test their limits, Rosalia charged back to the 6th floor and tore through the monsters with blinding speed and lethal precision. She decimated every opponent in seconds, leaving the protagonist in awe of just how effectively she handled the power boost. While he had originally aimed for a different magic class, the Magister profession was proving to be an incredible alternative. It allowed him to stand apart from Annalise, though it left him with practically zero combat effectiveness on his own. Since he was now entirely dependent on his teammates, managing a 3-man party was going to be a bit of a challenge. Looking closer at his system window, he discovered a life buff skill and followed the prompts to see what it could do. He placed a stone on the ground and breathed life into it, creating a tiny golem that Rosalia found hilarious and Annalise found adorable. He dubbed the little guy Ivac and ordered it forward, but the golem shouted its name, tripped, and immediately crumbled into pieces. Our hero sighed, realizing the little guy wasn't ready for war just yet, while Rosalia joked that he should just train at his own pace. With the new dynamic established, they spent the following hours grinding through monsters as the protagonist refined his support skills. With the enemy finally pulverized, he breathes a sigh of relief, noting they've gained enough levels for one day. They've gathered some high-quality materials from the 5th floor that'll be incredibly useful back home. This will definitely help fortify their base, he adds with a grin. Then he spots it, a rare drop item with the power to turn enemies to stone. While the tip isn't the sharpest, it boasts a high chance of petrification on impact. Clutching it, he dreams of using it on the assassin. Annalise warns him that anyone struck by this weapon will remain a statue even after they exit the dungeon. The trio then makes their way to the Adventurers Guild to trade their hard-earned loot for some cold, hard cash. The receptionist's eyes go wide as she gasps in amazement, stunned to see such high-quality F-rank magic stones and so many of them at once. Just the other day, they were on floor 4. Could they have already conquered the 6th? He offers a sheepish smile, claiming it was all just a lucky fluke, while his more experienced comrade pulls him away. The receptionist nods knowingly, leaning in to whisper a conspiratorial warning for them to watch their backs. A man traveling with 2 stunning beauties is bound to draw attention, and they've already become the talk of the town. Beauties? He wonders, confused. But as he turns around, the weight of the receptionist's warning becomes crystal clear. Other adventurers are already swarming his companions, trying to flirt. He quickly grabs their hands and bolts out the door. As they walk, he realizes they've been trying their best to keep a low profile while navigating the dungeon. However, rumors are spreading fast due to the frequency of their hauls. To stay under the radar, he decides to visit Gultio's shop next time. Looking at the girls, he pulls out his heavy coin purse and smiles, suggesting that since they're flush with cash, they should celebrate. He'd already told Mondarch they were eating out, and when Rosarina suggests the stew at Sinal Tavern, no one objects. The group heads over and orders a round of drinks and hearty stewed chicken, with our hero noting that hot stew is the perfect meal for a cold winter night. Raising his glass, he offers a sincere toast to the girls for all their hard work. Suddenly, a waiter approaches their table with an apologetic bow and asks to speak with him privately. A stranger suddenly asks for a moment of his time. Startled, our hero wonders how this man managed to sneak up on them and demands to know his identity. The man introduces himself as a servant of Duke Goldrant, explaining that they are scouting for talented individuals who have already proven their worth. Our protagonist is stunned that they want to recruit him as a soldier, but more importantly, how does this stranger already know his name? Then it clicks, the guild records. Once your level climbs high enough, the military starts knocking. The servant then asks, with a polite smile, if he'd be willing to visit the government office for a brief discussion. However, the MC remains suspicious of this strange invitation. His allies are technically higher level, yet the man is targeting him specifically. Sensing a trap, he tells the servant to forgive his refusal. He claims there must be a mistake, as a lowly traveler like himself has no business serving at court. The servant simply chuckles and pivots. He then asks if he could take the two ladies into his service instead. The girls look on in confusion as our hero delivers a firm answer. Not even for mountains of gold would he ever hand his companions over to anyone else. The servant bows respectfully, offers an apology, and bids them a good meal, mentioning that their tab has already been settled. Refusing the charity, the MC drops his own coins on the table and ushers the girls out, suggesting they find a new place to sit. But as they exit, he hears the servant whisper that they'll be seeing each other again very soon, specifically at his own estate. The protagonist's mind races with irritation. This is bad. This man isn't just a simple spy. Is he actually just stalling for time? Suddenly, the path is blocked as Balkan appears right in front of them. Glaring with pure malice, he declares that he won't let them escape like they did during their encounter the previous night. He reveals that His Grace, Duke Arcane, has summoned the MC and that he is to be escorted directly to the palace. Any refusal will be treated as an act of rebellion, punishable by immediate decapitation. Our hero never expected Obus to track him down so quickly. How did they figure him out? Nervously, he claims he has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Why would a powerful lord have any interest in a mere traveler like him? August dismissed any excuses. He understood the situation better than anyone. Toy realized he couldn't feign ignorance anymore. Escape seemed impossible against such an insane attack range. A single mistake meant being cut down instantly. If he were alone, he might have used his divine speed to flee, but he refused to abandon his companions. Suddenly, Rosarina stepped forward, prompting the MC to mentally call out to her in concern. Rosarina bluntly stated they were hungry and needed to clear the path immediately. Toy warned her that facing the captain was a death wish, telling her this feat was impossible even for her. He watched her closely, wondering what she was thinking. He was stunned by her resolve. Even Rosarina felt the overwhelming pressure. She realized that no matter how she moved, she was at a complete disadvantage. Even if she managed to land the first blow, She could already envision him cleaving her in two with a counterattack. The MC knew she was right to be cautious. Regardless of her strength, she couldn't bridge the gap against an opponent triple her own level. It was a hopeless situation they simply had to accept. Then, Annalisa leaned in and whispered to Toy, promising to hold the line with everything she had. She urged him to seize the opening and escape the city without looking back. Toy was shocked. He couldn't believe she'd risk herself. Annalisa explained that if captured, he'd face life in prison or execution. To the Lord, Toy's mere existence was a threat comparable to an entire bandit gang. They wanted him eliminated before he became too powerful to control. Annalisa was certain of the Lord's ruthless intent. Then she turned her attention to Rosarina. Toei asked her to take care of things, knowing that running was unacceptable. He knew Elisa would give her life for him, without hesitation, and Ogas wouldn't show a shred of mercy if the Duke ordered him to strike. Why would he run away again and leave Annalisa behind? Stepping forward, Toy stood his ground. He told them he understood and would meet the Lord in person to clear up this misunderstanding. It was better to discuss everything directly since he was the only one they wanted. Ogas agreed that for now, that was the deal. Annalisa shouted that this was unfair, but Toy told her to stay calm and that nothing bad would happen. He told them to wait at home, and if he was delayed, to reach out to Mr. Galt. Toa turned away and followed Ogas toward the castle. As they walked, Ogas mentioned that he had checked the dossier and found no criminal record, yet Toy still felt a sense of dread. He wondered if he'd return in one piece. At worst, he could escape using a skill, but he didn't want to be branded a criminal. He didn't want his friends to suffer for his actions. He still couldn't fathom the Duke's motives and knew he had to stay sharp. Toy admitted he had a poor grasp of noble etiquette, but Ogas replied that it didn't bother him at all. Lord Arcane Gardland observed him, noting that the Seeker was quite young to be so famous. He found it hard to believe that someone with such slender arms could have actually defeated Shardina. Toei nervously asked why he had been summoned, secretly wondering if the Lord had figured out his true power. Rakushin warned the Lord to be careful, but Arcane was focused on the boy's potential. He remarked that Toy controlled his abilities as if they were his own hands and feet, a feat even the royals couldn't achieve. Frightened, Toei claimed he had no idea what the Duke meant, desperately hoping they weren't about to kill him. Arcane told him they'd get to the long explanations later, but first, he wanted to give him the gist of it. Toei was actually entitled to a massive reward. Shocked, the young Seeker could only gasp, "A reward?" Arcane admitted that defeating the bandit gang would have been impossible without Toei's help, citing his evidence of corruption and tactical intel. If an outsider went unrewarded after such a massive contribution, the knights would lose faith. Toei's personal desires didn't matter. He simply needed to accept. Still in shock, Toei stammered that he didn't feel worthy of such a prestigious reward. Regardless, Arcane insisted on the compensation, demanding that Toei name his price to Count Rakushin. Toei realized the Duke simply hated being indebted. He was a man of principle, and settling the score now was easier for everyone involved. He told the Lord that, with his permission, he would decline the gold. Instead, he requested the funds be used to compensate the bandits' victims and reward the knights who fought by his side. Arcane scoffed, calling him a fool and noting that those arrangements had already been taken care of. Surely he knew that, after all, the amount they seized from Shardina's greedy treasury was more than enough to cover the costs. Even so, Toei remained firm in his refusal. He stood tall and proudly declared that as a Seeker, he would earn his own fortune through his hard work in the dungeons. Ogas let out a laugh, amused by how boldly the young man spoke in the presence of the Duke. Arcane let out a long exhale and muttered, "I see. Then I shall grant you a different reward," he said, calling Toei forward. He announced that he was elevating the young man to the rank of honorary baron. Toy didn't process the words at first, but a moment later, the weight of the statement hit him. Stunned, he wondered if he had heard correctly. An honorary baron? Was he actually becoming a nobleman? Arcane ordered the papers to be prepared immediately, insisting they teach this impudent brat the basics of noble etiquette. The attendant bowed in understanding, telling Toye that since he refused the gold, he had no choice but to accept the title. Toy realized he had been completely set up. Annalisa rushed to him, overjoyed that he had finally returned safely. Exhausted, Toy could barely announce his arrival before Rosarina stepped in. She noticed his condition was off, while Annalisa pointed out how pale he looked. He was limp, looking as if he'd been tortured, so Rosarina grabbed him and ran. She insisted he needed a hot bath to recover and promptly threw him into the tub. Toy snapped back to his senses, shocked by the sudden splash. He apologized to the group, explaining that his mind had simply shut down. His brain had overheated from the stress, but he assured them he was fine now. Annalisa admitted they were terrified he wouldn't come back, and Toy apologized for the scare. Shaking off the tension, she asked him to explain what had actually happened. Toy awkwardly confessed that it seemed he had been made a nobleman. The news left everyone in shock as he tried to explain the situation. He revealed his new title was honorary baron, though he was still processing it himself. While Rosarina offered her congratulations, Rekushin took a more practical approach. He told Toy that he needed to learn exactly what an honorary baron's role entailed. Handing him a stack of books for later, he gave him a quick summary of the basics. He held the rights of a baron for his lifetime, though the title couldn't be inherited. He had no daily duties, but was required to serve during wars or disasters and attend council twice a year. Toy raised his hand, asking if he was still allowed to go dungeon diving. Rekushin agreed, but with a stern warning: Toy must behave prudently to avoid tarnishing the prestigious reputation of the ducal house. Toy exhaled in relief, thinking that as long as he could still dive into dungeons like before, everything would be just fine. Rekushin pressed him further, making it clear that starting conflicts with other adventurers, or worse, dying, was strictly forbidden. A terrified Toy quickly agreed to be careful as Rekushin moved on to the details of his housing and salary. Since Toy was already renting an estate, the Duke's family would simply buy the property and transfer the deed directly to him. Toy was stunned. His rental was becoming his own. Between that and a staggering salary of 12 million grills a year, he was set. On top of that, he'd receive a 3 million grills signing bonus for the remaining 2 months, leaving Toy absolutely floored. With such a massive annual income, Toy started to get ahead of himself, but Rekushin told him not to get too excited just yet. That signing bonus had a specific purpose. As a baron, the bare minimum requirement was for him to acquire a staff of servants. He needed to use those funds to immediately arrange housing and accommodations for his new subordinates. Toy was blindsided by the sudden responsibility, but Rekushin explained that there were strict requirements for his new rank. To maintain his status as an honorary baron, he needed at least 1 knight and 5 soldiers, and they had to be reliable, capable people. He also needed to choose a surname and a coat of arms. Overwhelmed by the sudden workload, Toy felt like he was failing on his very first day. Desperate for guidance, Toy turned to Mondark, asking him to help master the complex rules and manners of the nobility. Mondark promised to be of use, but Toy was already stressing over where he'd find a knight and 5 soldiers on such short notice. Since Mondark was a servant, and Annalisa and Rosarina were officially registered as slaves, they couldn't fill those military roles. Sensing his master's struggle, Mondark mentioned he knew a woman with knightly experience in the city and offered to contact her. Toy gave him the green light immediately, and Mondark added that he had already summoned a professional tailor to the estate. When Toy questioned the need for a tailor, Mondark reminded him that he needed a wardrobe fit for his new noble station. Once the formal attire was ready, Toy was expected to report directly to the palace as instructed by Lord Rakushin's messenger. But first, they needed to approve his family name and crest, to which Tuya awkwardly agreed. He felt Mondarch was being far too generous by helping him out, but then noticed his hair had grown quite a bit. After all, he'd already been in this world for nearly 2 months. Soon, Tuya appeared in his new attire and asked the others for their honest opinion. Annalisa told him he looked perfect, while Mondarch praised the outfit's undeniable elegance. Tuya then headed back to court to officially register his family name and coat of arms. He was now officially an honorary baron, known to this world as Baron Tuya Footsickle. Choosing a name from his ancestors, he selected a wisteria flower for his crest, a rare choice compared to the Duke's dragons. Duke Arcane noted that he finally looked the part, expressing high expectations for the boy's future. Tuya felt the Duke was still talking down to him, but he refused to be anyone's lapdog. He gave a formal bow and asked for permission to take his leave. However, August stopped him, insisting that Tuya accompany him immediately. Tuya felt a wave of dread wash over him, sensing a very bad omen. Soon, he was gasping for air, wondering how he had ended up in such a grueling situation. August urged him on, demanding he get back on his feet without delay. He gestured toward the captain, mocking whether this was truly the behavior of an honorable baron. Tuya collapsed again, crying out as his muscles screamed in agony. August ordered him to stand up and go again, and Tuya struggled to find his footing. He weakly asked how much longer this torture would last, but August simply replied that they wouldn't stop until he decided they were finished. The MC was stunned. August explained that this entire month was dedicated to intensive training for the knights. Starting tomorrow, Toy would join them. Shocked, Toy argued that he hadn't even enlisted yet and had too much on his plate. August brushed him off, insisting that training was the priority and calling him a coward for hiding in the shadows. Who would follow a leader like that? He challenged Toy to stop playing coy if he was so confident in his abilities. If he could land even a single hit, he'd be exempt from training. Toy stood up and asked for a practice broadsword. He immediately switched his class to two-handed sword hero, determined not to waste the entire day. He needed a real blade to make this work. He warned August that he wouldn't be holding back his skills. He activated his core buffs: two-handed sword support, body enhancement, and HP auto-regeneration. Finally, he triggered foresight. August grinned, telling him to give it everything he had as the tension rose. The atmosphere shifted instantly. August was curious to see how Toy would handle such a massive weapon. It was time to get serious. He needed to see if the rumors about honorary Baron Toy were actually true. Toy didn't hesitate, launching into a direct and powerful assault. He swung at the captain repeatedly, appearing like a completely different warrior than before. Despite his size, Toy moved like a colossus, twirling the heavy blade with terrifying ease. He handled the steel like it was a feather, surprisingly managing to push the captain back. August was impressed, noting that Toy's self-taught technique was remarkably solid. His reactions were lightning fast, showing incredible potential for a novice. However, he was still unrefined. With a single expert blow, August disarmed him completely. Toy didn't give up. He leaped into the air and reappeared behind the captain to strike. He quickly cycled through his assassin skills: divine speed and shadow palm strike. A strike from a blind spot is usually impossible to parry, yet our protagonist still ends up eating dirt. Wait, was he just launched into the air? August notes that while his aim was true, it wasn't enough. August explains that with perfect timing, even those hits are parryable. Toy wonders how this old man deflects attacks from a blind spot so effortlessly. It's clear this old man is a master of the highest order. He acknowledges that Toy's skills are impressive, but warns that overthinking the ideal combat scenario will get him killed. In a real fight, instinct and experience are what truly matter. With that, They agree he'll begin training immediately, and Toy hesitantly accepts the challenge. Checking on him, August praises his performance, noting that few knights can go toe-to-toe with the captain like that. Toy can only feel a mix of awkwardness and embarrassment at receiving such high praise. Later, Annalisa rushes over, shocked by his month-long training regimen. She demands to know why he returns in rags after every session. Exhausted from his visit to the palace, Toy collapses onto his bed. He begins to wonder what kind of insane training this is. He actually finds himself wishing he were back in the dangerous dungeons instead. Toy realizes that without the proper skills, his current life is just as perilous as any monster den. He recognizes that the captain cares in his own gruff way, and since dueling experience is invaluable, he resolves to push through. Vowing to prove himself, he's interrupted by Mondarch, who apologizes for the intrusion and asks to confirm tomorrow's schedule. Toy agrees, remembering that tomorrow is the big meeting with the knight he was recently introduced to. The candidate was a squad leader for Toy's former master, a man of proven strength, but Toy needs to judge his character personally. Toy finds himself surprisingly nervous about the interview. Covered in bruises from training, he realizes he needs to chug a potion just to look somewhat dignified. Annalisa treats his wounds early the next morning, reassuring him that everything will be fine. After all, he's the one doing the hiring. As long as he stays true to himself, things will work out. The next day finally arrives. The next day, Miras approached to apologize, leaving Toy feeling a bit awkward. Toy replied that it was fine, though he couldn't help but notice the man was a literal giant. Introducing himself as Miras Gandarban, he revealed he was a level 22 heavyweight knight. Toy studied the bear-like Beastman, certain he'd seen this massive warrior somewhere before. Then it clicked. This was the leader of the party that had been harassing Rosarina at the item shop. Miras recognized him too, asking if they'd met in the dungeon and confirming if Toy was indeed a baron. Toy confirmed his identity, introducing himself formally as Toy Futzicle. He noted Miras's impressive stats, a level 22 tank with the heavyweight knight class and professional standing. As a former squad leader and seasoned warrior, Miras sat down and offered a sincere apology for his party's behavior. He admitted he hadn't realized Toy was an honorary baron, though Toy downplayed his new noble status. When asked about the wolf Beastman from before, Miras explained the man had suffered a severe hand injury. After a disastrous boss fight, the wolf retired to a village, having ignored Miras's orders and charged in recklessly. Toy wondered if the story would hurt Miras's reputation, but Miras took full responsibility for failing his teammate. He refused to hide his past failures before entering service, proving to Toy that he was a man of integrity. Impressed by his character, Toy asked what would become of Miras's current party if he were to join him. Miras replied that they would need to consult with the rest of the squad regarding their future. The squad had reached the 6th floor, but the members feared they'd be finished without their captain. Lin, the cat Beastman spearwoman, worried about their future, while her teammates discussed their captain's luck. Bars, the dog Beastman swordsman, insisted they support the captain, hoping the Baron might take them all in. Celidia the fox Beastman and the party's lizard man also prepared themselves for the captain's eventual departure. The swordsman Jojok realized that all they could do was trust the captain they had agreed to follow. The MC noted that he had actually been keeping a close eye on the group from the shadows for some time. They were surprisingly disciplined, standing patiently in the cold with only one exception. For that wolf brawler, however, this was all business as usual. They trusted Miras implicitly as a man of honor. The team composition consisted of 2 swordsmen and 2 spearmen, leaving some room for improvement. Toye ordered them to gather around, intending to take everyone at once, which the MC realized was to their advantage. Now, under the command of the honorary baron, the unit consisted of 1 knight and 4 soldiers. Lin teased him about being such a cute baron, while Jojok and Bar were stunned that someone so young held such a high rank. Miras told them not to be rude, though he wondered if the Baron's instant approval was wise without testing their skills. Toye remained confident, knowing his habit of making snap decisions was always backed by thorough analysis. He confirmed everyone was geared up, then announced they were heading straight to the boss. The group was shocked, asking how it was possible to arrive at the boss's door so instantaneously. Miras asked if this was truly a dungeon movement skill, and the MC confirmed his suspicions. Miras was impressed, mentioning he'd only seen elite frontline teams use such skills, wondering who this man really was. Toye explained that they would all sign non-disclosure agreements later, as his abilities had to remain a secret. The team replied in unison, making it clear they understood the weight of the situation. He calculated that they could handle a pair of labyrinth bulls as Miras stepped into position. Miras instructed the team to stick to their usual combat patterns, and they signaled their readiness. Activating cargo fixation, he raised his shield and shouted for the team to prepare for the engagement. As the attack began, she responded instantly while he prepared his next move. She expertly wielded the storm sword before transitioning into a triple spear technique. The monsters were cut down instantly. Fox unleashed his devastating skills, chaining, smashing strike into a jumping spear. The MC observed that the synergy between the tank, main DPS, and sub-DPS was perfect. It was a flawless execution, proving that recruiting a pre-established team was a brilliant move. Their instant coordination was a massive advantage. He realized then that he had underestimated their true collective strength. Rosarina crushed a monster with her bare hands, while Annalisa's magic obliterated the remaining foes. As they finished, Mira spoke up, stating that all three of them were far too powerful for normal work. He called their performance amazing, joking that they wouldn't even need guards. Despite their unconventional methods, the results were undeniable and impressive. He proved himself a master of both magic and melee, fitting the rumors of the Lord's party. With one knight and 4 soldiers now recruited, only one spot remained, and he had an idea. Rosarina was a slave bound by debt, so he planned to pay it off and grant her freedom for her service. After discussing the logistics, he decided he would free Annalisa as well. As a newly appointed nobleman, he felt it was his duty to act with honor. Training with the infernal instructor was set for tomorrow, and Mira insisted on participating. She admitted they were all looking forward to the intense training with great anticipation. Meanwhile, in the royal capital of Mangas, questions arose about those abandoned in the labyrinth. What does that even mean? Abandoning a wounded comrade to die in a dungeon? How can they even call themselves heroes after that? He coldly told her to shut her mouth. They were making a fuss over some low-ranking assistant, but the only thing that mattered was that the hero returned alive. What's the problem? She argued that they needed to stop. He hadn't returned yet. She recalled that if she remembered correctly, his profession was a lowly porter, a specific support class. It was reported that he was utterly exhausted from the relentless labor and was regularly beaten by the 3 heroes. He claimed it was his own fault for being a clumsy burden. If they had dragged that slowpoke along, they all would have died. They weren't going back, but 8 hours ago, he cursed their defeat at the George Labyrinth boss room, demanding a quick heal for his next turn. He claimed that if they hadn't overextended, they would have won. They had to try again. She protested that they needed to stop. She was at her limit and had no strength left. They were out of potions and food, and the trek back alone would take half a day. She refused to sleep on the streets for a 3rd night. If they still wanted to fight, then they could do it themselves. He cursed and insisted they head back. He told them to wait. He needed to rest, as his mana was completely depleted.